Okay, this is episode 12 of Narrative Wake, and I'm sure some people want me to censor these intros that I do where I refer to esports pools, but if you know anything about me, I'm incredibly ardent in my love of esports pools, and I'm just going to go ahead and ignore that meta and keep cranking out these intros, no matter how many times people try to blitz this showrunner. So, see, that's straight fire. Right. Just my own review as well at the end of it, right? So this is episode 12, as referred to before. I am Thorin, usual co-host. Well, usual host for everything, basically. Make the show, record it, edit it, provoke, incite, reflect, react, listen, understand, draw things out of people. Think about that for a few minutes. Right. Kelsey Moser here. Usual co-host, no matter how much people react, get frustrated, get angry, complain, make suggestions. Because if you haven't figured it out yet, the concept was to actually make a show with her. I didn't go, I'm going to make a League of Legends show. Let's hold open auditions and everyone in the world can audition to be on the show. Being as I actually wanted to make a show with her, she's fairly integral to the process. You know, you can sort of see my reasoning there. The logic holds up, doesn't it? So the guests for this episode, don't talk there. You don't need to talk. Don't defend yourself. Just let your actions do all the talking. So the guests for this episode is, we're going to start with Zirene. He's in the bottom right-hand corner. Just kind of like to go around the overlay, you know. Now, Zirene actually holds one of the notable, I won't say accomplishments, it's not really an accomplishment, but just a notable piece of trivia, was one of the last ever guests on Summoning Insight, actually.
That's
so
true.
Perhaps this show will die in a couple of episodes. Who knows? could happen. I
just ruined everything I'm on, so I'll see you guys, next year, and I could ruin another one of Thorin's shows. I'm doing, the community a favor.
Yeah. Including the NA LCS, I mean, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, we had the original 4 commentators. I came on, and then.
So our other guest for this episode is Grabbz. Now, if you're trying to search through your memory banks, and your memory banks are anything like esports wikis, then you won't be able to find who Grabbz is. You'll be thinking, who is that? And he's actually the head coach of ROCCAT. But here's the thing. Don't overreact to that. Like, the thing about coaching isn't always directly represented in the results. Like, the person who wins isn't the best coach. The person who loses isn't the worst coach. Because, for example, an aspect that is massively, I think, not considered enough when it comes to coaching is the coach isn't also the owner of the team, the person who gets the sponsors, and the person who necessarily decides who joins the team. So basically, whatever you have as your talent pool is what you work with, and therefore the expectations should be entirely set by that. With that said, it's not exactly the best coaching record ever, but we'll see how he does on a talk show, because here's the thing, guys, he's not coaching us, he's just talking to us. So all this show is about, Grabbz, is talking. And that's actually how I got the idea to do this particular episode, because I saw you and Zirene making some interesting comments when I was asking. I put the public play out there for some concepts on how they were doing some of the drafts, because obviously that has been a huge topic for these quarterfinals, because we had these 3 different matchups that featured Western teams against Asian teams. And when we had all of these matchups, which, I mean, it goes without saying, all the Western teams did lose the matchups, and now we have an all-Asian semi-finals. One of the main things people seemed to critique was the drafts almost entirely. Like, actually, it's bizarre. In the groups, people's go-to initially usually was like a player. Like, they'd pick a player they thought did badly in a matchup, or, just tilted, or whatever it might be. But I notice now, I feel like part of this might have been affected by TSM's elimination, because I noticed people really obsessed over their last draft. And so it felt like everyone's, like, almost only pit stop was all these drafts. So I want to start, with I'll start sort of in reverse order. I want to start with the last series, actually. So it should be the freshest in everyone's mind, which is the Team WE versus Cloud9 matchup. Now, before we get into the specifics of the draft, etc., Zirene, coming into this one, did Cloud9 have a chance to upset, did you think?
I actually thought they did. I thought they had a pretty good chance to upset. I thought that GA wasn't looking as strong. I mean, he's actually like kind of a weaker point on the team. And I think Jensen, he was pulling out some weird picks. He got the Galio in there, then he got the Aurelion Soil. And I thought that like Cloud9 was coming together at the right time. It was Sneaky who I had the question mark about. And he did kind of up his performance near the end of groups and coming into this game. But it was like Mystic's a monster. Like, I think that's really what you take away from the series. It's just an absolute monster.
Okay, because Kelsey, that was one of the things I remember when the first week of groups was played. Now, I realise I have to say it like that as though it was ages ago, but people do...
There's a big difference.
People swing so wildly in League of Legends based on best of ones that the reason I referenced that in week 1 when WE played, people were talking mad shit on Mystic. Like, when he played against TSM, they were like, oh, this guy's supposed to be the best AD carry in LPL. Now, is he, in theory, a better player than Sneaky at the moment?
I mean, I do think Mystic is a very strong AD carry, but I think that WE have a similar issue with their bot lane, which is that in laning phase, to Cloud9, which is that in laning phase, their bottom lane doesn't necessarily do that well in the 2v2. WE, I think part of it is just like really, really over-aggressive play. And you can say cockiness, but they do this in the LPL as well, and it's just a general issue where if they give up kills or whatever, and then I actually like the players themselves will say, okay, Mystic will die in laning phase, but top side will be getting something from it, like either control of the wave, like vision, something like this. So we'll always just encourage them and say, it's okay, you're doing really well, we're winning off of this. And maybe that's not always true, but that's what happens. And then so WE then focus much more on team fights. And I actually thought Cloud9's bot lane performs a similar function, but WE's just does it a little bit better.
Because obviously, I mean, you've referenced a number of times that basically WE players are on the bot lane anyway. It's obviously a traditional strength, but I mean, in this lineup, we saw they basically got Kog'Maw onto Mystic almost every single game. There was only one where they didn't, and generally, it would seem to work out pretty well. So what do you think the approach was for them in this game?
I mean, I think that obviously, like on the desk commentary, Frost was very frustrated with the Kog'Maw thing. I think Kog'Maw works fairly well depending on the situation. In these particular cases, I think the Kog'Maw actually worked really well. If you could get, for example, Janna, if you could get some kind of terrain focus, like if you could get the Jarvan and the Kog'Maw, like I felt like a bigger problem was giving up Jarvan, for example, and then taking the Kog'Maw and not being able to use like this free terrain creation for your AD carry, these types of scenarios. So I thought that was like more of an issue than the AD carry pick itself. Like if Tristana is off the table, or if Tristana is on the other team, then I think Kog'Maw still works really well because Kog'Maw is a pick that scales well, like Tristana, maybe doesn't do as well in laning phase, but will have really, really long range to match her later. Obviously, Tristana is like the most ideal pick, but Kog'Maw to me is like one of the better answers.
Okay. Grabbz, what do you think of Jensen playing Ori and Sol in this series?
I wanted to mention that we should not forget that in 4 of the 5 games, we had champions who are very big at influencing bot lane. I think we had 2 Talia games, 1 Galio game, 1 Aurelion Sol game. And those, of course, give the matchup on bot as well. So even if you have, let's say, Caitlyn into something else, and they suddenly have a Flying Dragon on your lane, that matchup gets negated. So I like the pick, of course. It's kind of like pseudo Talia or Gaia. You get free lane pressure, and you have to be very precise on those first roams you get. But we saw in the first game what can happen if you actually pull off those ganks with Janna together, pick up the Aurelion Sol and go bot and dive. So I liked it a lot. Okay,
so I can't remember who said this, but someone on my Twitter timeline made a comment which was along the lines of, whenever you analyze a draft in a series, you can't act as though it was in isolation. Like, especially if it's a 5th game, obviously every game before, wins and losses, you're all factoring in, not just even in terms of what you want, but what you think the other person will do and therefore what your reaction will be. So this was one of the most criticized drafts of the tournament, was game 5 of this series, where Cloud9 basically gave, like, I'll give you sort of the layman Reddit version, which is that they basically gave what people think are all the power picks over to WE. Like, they gave them Galio, and they gave them Kog'Maw, and they gave them Janna, but all at the same time, right? On the face of it, if you do just look at it in isolation, is that ridiculous, Zirene? You've muted yourself, by the way.
I actually think it's ridiculous, because they banned the Rumble, which I don't think was influential in the series up until that point at all. and then they let the Galio through. And then they gave him this combination of the Galio alongside the Janna to protect Mystic on that Kog'Maw. And I thought that actually ended up being a big issue. Not to say like C9's draft, the composition they made themselves or crafted, was crap. I thought that they actually had clear win conditions to play to the bottom side. It just didn't go that way because of the fact that, it's so easy to execute the WE composition.
Okay. So Grabbz, are you also of a similar mind? Can you see any other logic as to why you'd give up these power picks in terms of what you get yourself, or if you think you can play against it? What would you theory craft as a logical reason why you'd do this?
My big issue with the 5th game draft, especially Galio, was that the 4 games before, both teams banned Galio on blue side. They clearly showed, okay, we don't want to deal with this. And then in game 5, we leave it open, and I was like, okay, they have to have something that they didn't want to show before. And they pick Orianna into it, which technically on lane has a bit of pressure, but she's not like really punishing the Galio or making life hard for him. And basically, they even picked the Shen Gnar into it, and then suddenly you get another win condition on top lane where they could have played with the Galio. So, the thing is, again, in game 5, of course, you have games before where you have to react to. But if there's a pick you clearly are afraid of the whole series, you cannot leave that one open. It's the same as if you would suddenly leave Kalista open. It doesn't make sense. If the 4 games before you've shown, okay, we can't deal with this. So no, I don't like the approach.
Is that actually a comp that C9 has that in theory, like what would the win condition be for their comp here?
I actually don't mind the draft overall because I feel like Shen is a decent answer. Like if you're matching a Galio, I think that Shen Sejuani in particular is a really punishing combination early on. If you're wanting to set up plays like this, especially around bot, like if you have the Caitlyn Lulu setup, then you can create like a lot of playmaking around the bot side with Shen, and the Galio in and of itself isn't necessarily going to destroy everything. However, I do agree that the Orianna is weird. Like I feel like Corki, which wasn't banned or whatever, Corki was up, kind of saves the draft to an extent. If you have the Corki available, like you can play Corki into Galio, right?
Kelsey was officially the counter. LeBlanc is also a pick we used, on ROCCAT we used against the Galio as well because we have early pressure and you can match the with teleport. But
I just feel like the Corki also scales extremely well and like can benefit from the Shen. I mean, obviously the LeBlanc can too, but yeah, I just felt like that this was like something that would have been really good in this particular draft. Was like kind of missing like the scaling hypercarry to match the Kog'Maw almost, I guess. So for me, it was like the Corki was the pick that made the most sense to me, but I do think that they still had a ridiculous amount of options, and just like having Galio in of itself, they had some answers to that, particularly with the Shen, if they could get some pressure in the top lane. And it wasn't like Gnar was like constantly pushing the Shen to top, I think, in this game the entire time, but like there were some openings where you can use the Shen ult with the Sejuani and things of that nature on bot side. So I think that there were options. So I don't think this draft was terrible. And I think it's ridiculous that people said that the draft itself cost Cloud9 this series because like ignoring this game in isolation, Cloud9 basically outdrafted WE for the majority of the series. So I just...
Okay.
Yeah.
But in a world where these are the comps that are drafted by both teams, did Cloud9 play out what they were going for? Did they seem to have a clear sense of what they had to do in the game? This is for anyone, by the way. This is an open session.
So there was that whole discussion about like draft versus execution.
Yes.
And draft is going to set you up and give you like those tools that you need, but the execution is also a big factor. And I think C9 in the last game, I think they slightly dropped the ball on both of them because they were up in kills like pretty much the entire game. They were getting those early advantages, but I felt like their pressure point of the Caitlyn, their winning lane with the Kate Lulu versus the Kog Janna, they weren't able to pressure it enough. And there was a dive that 957 was able to stave off because he TP'd to the bot turret, and then C9's like, I don't want this. And that really relieved pressure. They got first turret for 957 top lane, and then they lost a lot of that early game, and WE could keep up. And so, like, in the draft, I thought that the biggest issue was C9 didn't take Galio themselves because they can flex that shit. Like, Impact is his most played champion top lane in the regular season. So it would have given him more power in the draft. They gave that over, and now it's, like, really easy for WE to execute or counter what C9 want to do. And C9, I thought they played pretty badly in that last game. They didn't get to execute the way that they wanted to. So I thought execution is the thing that should be criticized more than the draft.
Did they have to win by like a certain point in the game? Was it like a time-based difference between the comps?
I think there's a few things. Oh, go ahead.
I clearly think so, just because of the Gnar Shen matchup. Because at some point, Gnar can just take towers in front of the Shen, whereas Cloud9 doesn't have the same pressure anywhere else on the map. Especially if having Orianna, she's not a side laner. And also, Caitlyn has a huge mid-game dip still, even though it kind of got relegated to Earth Sensor. So yeah, I think Cloud9 did have to, especially if Caitlyn is like Tristana, she wants to have the first tower, rotate around, get other towers, kind of snowball the game. But if you're relying on a global to do that with Chen, and the other team also has a global, of course, it's really hard to execute properly.
Okay.
I think just
Kelsey,
like avoiding the mid-game dip again was key, because like Caitlyn wasn't able to transition from the bot lane. And if you don't have Caitlyn able to transition, like get the first turret, transition mid, transition top, whatever, in these orders, like by the 15-minute mark, Caitlyn's going to have a really hard time. And then at a certain point, yeah, Caitlyn does scale for late game, but Kog'Maw is going to do that a little bit better. And Kog'Maw has a lot of tools for protection and safety, so it's not going to be a tool that's easy to match anyway. So
one thing that did surprise me, though, is like on the past episodes, anytime we talked about Shia, we pointed out that he has a fairly limited champion pool. It's just that once he gets those 2 or 3 champions, obviously that's when he has the massive pop-off games, and that's when everyone looks, and if you just only look at his ceiling, you'd think, what a great fucking mid laner. Isn't, in theory, one of your number 1 priorities when you play against WE, just do not give them Galio?
yeah, Galio, Talia, for sure. Like these are, I think she is like most effective champions because he wants to be inside lane. Like he was initially a Twisted Fate main, so he just like has a really good sense for when he should be helping side lane, how to push out the lane, how to reset, like these types of instances. So I think that, yeah, these are the types of champions he's going to gravitate toward the best and have the largest impact on. And yeah, he got these last 3 champions, and Guangdong is like his home province, and so he was able to perform really well on that stage. So good for him. Good job.
Yeah. Well, I also think Galio is like, you remember how Apto talked about Aurelion Sol, where there's all these boosted challenger players by Aurelion Sol? That's literally what Galio is in professional play. Is like good people can play him and it looks fantastic. But if you're a boosted monkey in the mid lane and this other guy across the rift is better than you, this neutralizes that matchup to a point where that guy's going to be frustrated because you have TP and you have a semi-global ultimate in the middle of the lane. You're hard to kill, hard to gank. You have good gank assistance yourself, and then you scale. And when you group and you have a hyper carry, AD carry, you aren't punished for actually taking the farm as that AD carry when you group up, right? Because people are grouping as 4, yes. The Galio's there. Normally a Cassiopeia is like trying to get farm alongside a Tristana, then one of you has to go to a side lane and come back. Galio is like, I have TP, I can go there. Even if we group, I have low income and I don't need that much for my items. So like this champion makes people who aren't particularly fantastic at the mid lane compared to the person across the rift from them, then I think it's the champion to play. Like if I was ever to go up against Faker, I'd be like, I need Galio to do anything in that lane.
To be fair, I think Shia's taunts are like particularly dirty. Like he's always has a really good sense for his ult. So like I've always really liked the way Shia plays Galio. Perhaps more so in the summer regular season, but like I think his Galio is actually really good.
See, that's the thing is like people are like, this guy's Galio is really good, and I'm like, Galio just looks the same.
No. I know what you're saying because I agree in general, but I actually think Shia's Galio is like good in particular.
So like if Galio puts you at a 90, normally Shia's got like a 92 because there's so little to do with Galio, but he's able to do it.
Okay, one of the things... Yeah, go on, Grabbz.
I just love Galio as a champion because he himself, even though you said he's so easy to play, he doesn't hold enough power to win the game. So you actually get rewarded as a coach for a good draft, who actually lets Galio shine. Like we often saw this tournament, a Galio who doesn't have winning side lanes, and suddenly he does nothing in the game, and Lakata's champion is useless. So I like the champions like Galio, Talia. I mean, Twisted Fate back then in Season 2 and 3, when he's still a good laning phases, he was the go-to champion. Just because of that reason, he facilitates the team. Now, of course, with Talia and Galio, they have better laning phases, and they can do the same thing. So even though he's frustrating to play against, I just think you should never give a good team Galio or Talia. Also going forward for semi-finals.
even though people, here's one of the things that I felt was a bit anticlimactic was the order that all these games were played in.
Yeah.
Because since this game was played last, the Cloud9 versus WE one, right? People want to tie it into the other two matches, the Fnatic one and the Misfits one, and go, wow, look at these great performances by the Western teams. Whereas I have to say, watching WE in this tournament, this has to be one of the worst teams to ever make top 4 at a Worlds. Like, you look at who they've played to get here, they have yet to play a single, like, elite team, basically.
Okay, H2K or WE?
Yeah, listen, they're comparable, but H2K did beat EDG, so I don't think that's still better than beating Cloud9 and TSM. You know, like I'll give you props for that. Like they're definitely two contenders for that, and obviously, by the way, it's a pretty good class of people. You know, there's not many bad teams have made there, but I'm just saying the difference is usually if you make top 4, you probably have a crack at winning it. Whereas yes, WE and H2K in theory didn't really ever have a crack at winning it. In fact, most people don't expect them to even win the semis. So what do you actually think, without going into the specific matchup yet, what do you think of WE over the tournament, Zirene?
I feel like they benefited a lot from going into play-ins because I feel like that was kind of a warm-up for them, and they were able to kind of get back into a groove, understand, okay, this is what we can do. The meta favors us playing bottom side, and I think that they actually have a pretty good stylistic matchup for the meta at the moment. I think all the LPL teams do, actually, the ones that played at the bottom side of both Team WE and RNG. Because right now, bottom lane, I actually don't think it matters how good you are in 2-on-2, because barrier and heal, and then having Rise, Talia, double TP with a Corki or a Galio mid lane. Like the mid lane meta right now is to roam and get out of the lane and go elsewhere. It's not to body the person across the rift from you. And I think that that's really good for WE because they can just keep playing to Mystic. And okay. Ben. I think actually Ben is a little underrated. He played really well.
Yeah, I think WE actually get an insane amount from having like a strong mid matchup or a winning mid matchup, but they don't even seem to realize it because they don't play to acquiring that at all. Like some of their best rotations in terms of like using bot lane to go to top and everything else are enabled by having pressure mid, but they don't even seem to acknowledge that. And then when they can't do it, they just seemingly have no idea why. So when that's another benefit of like having these champions like the Talia and the Galios, that they usually will have push mid, and then like it all just sort of fits together in this weird way in which they don't even have to necessarily acknowledge or be aware of their weaknesses.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, usually when I cover draft, I'll talk about like who has winning lane, who has the pressure jungler. If you have kill pressure, I'll write down you have pressure in that lane. And then in mid lane right now, pretty much all I write is do you have the shove advantage? I don't care if you can like kill the guy. I don't really care if it's like too much of a favorable matchup unless it's like, you know, Orianna into Ryze or Cassio into Ryze or something like a direct counter pick. But I feel like whoever has shove advantage, it just means so much right now. Even if it's like a Syndra playing against a Jace mid, it's like, okay, the Syndra has shove advantage. Even though she's going to be like pushed in this lane, she does have opportunities to really roam and outwave clear him. So I feel like mid lane is that island that now tries to, or not the island, it's mid lane's like, you just need to shove, you don't need to beat the guy, and you need to help your team win the rest of the game. And you might get resources like wards and your jungler might come, but that's to free you up to go elsewhere. I think mid lane turret is like the least likely turret to die right now first. I think more bottom lane turrets drop because of 4-man dives, and then top lanes because of swaps. So mid is just like you keep your turret up for a good while until like 3 swaps come through.
Yep.
Okay, I realize that when you have a series matchup, it's not really about who the better team is, it's about who matches up better against that specific team. So you can't do this in isolation. But if you consider that, obviously the only team that WE couldn't have drawn was Misfits because they were in the same group, but they could instead have had, they could have had Samsung Galaxy, they could have had, what was the other one? Fnatic. Those are the other 2 teams they could have had, right? Would they have beaten those teams?
If they would have beaten Fnatic.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just think, if I can start, sorry, that Fnatic has very big issues with their mid-jungle synergy. Like what Zirene just talked about, like picking up the mid laner, getting vision for him, shoving out, and then going bot. Fnatic still neglects caps in a sense. And I think, especially against Chinese teams, which are very aggressive around the mid laner. I mean, every other team in the top 8 was kind of aggressive around that. So yeah, they would have definitely won against Fnatic.
Yeah, I actually would like to touch on that a little bit because I think that Fnatic got a little bit better at controlling mid. I just think that Caps dropped the ball. So he didn't look good, and I think GA and Mystic would have been able to carry those games, and 957 a little bit.
I think over the course of time, Fnatic's problem has become less like specifically about mid and more if they're focusing attention in a lane, they will give up pressure on like the complete rest of the map, right? If they decide they're playing on top, around top, if they decide they're playing around mid or whatever at a given point, they just like completely give up focus on the rest of the map. So yeah, from that perspective, I actually think that's something WE are very good at, especially if you look at like the way top lane works and the way that 957, even if he's like not the best in the 1v1, is able to control the lane off of jungle pressure, or is able to get vision off of jungle pressure from like specifically the enemy junglers like presence or lack thereof. I think it's really, really good and worth talking about in terms of what WE get throughout the game and like how they're able to stay competitive. Like even if they give up kills, it's very rare that they give up major early game objectives consistently. So I think that that's something to point out and discuss compared to the way Fnatic play.
Okay. After having seen, Cloud9 obviously was the best placing NA team because they're the only one to make it out of the groups. But after having seen them at Worlds, contrasted to, they obviously didn't have a very good performance in the playoffs in NA LCS. What do you make of their whole Worlds run, Zirene? Like what overall? What's your evaluation of Cloud9?
I feel like they got out of a group that EDG was underperforming in, and I think EDG actually probably, if they had actually done better in week 1, would have been the better representative to move on to the quarterfinals, because I think they were starting to get in that groove. I think the meta favors them a little bit more with iBoy actually being somebody who can carry. And I do think that the way that the meta shifted, because you think back to quarterfinals, semifinals, and the finals of the North American LCS, this was not when people were already jumping on like the Ardent Sensor train, and the meta actually shifted afterwards. People were playing like Recon as they could get the engage. People were still playing Thresh. They were still looking for all of these pick champions. And then I think the meta shifted. And I got to tell you, playing barrier heal bottom lane feels like shit if you're a playmaker, because you don't even get Sightstone until like 10 plus minutes into the game because you're rushing Ardent Sensor. So you don't want to roam. You literally actually don't want to leave the lane because you lose gold income from not being around minions with coin, and you want to get that Ardent Sensor as soon as possible. So I think for North America, we were taught 80 carries, play safe, mid laner, get priority, and support, roam around the map and make plays. So I think like what Misfits did was better, where they were able to kind of force that to happen. And I think for C9, I feel like the meta kind of moved away from what their preference was with the support role. Because I think Smoothie was integral to how they made it to the World Championship. And then I think the meta kind of shifted.
In the 2 games that C9 won were the ones where Sneaky had Tristana. And in all the other games combined, he got something like 4 kills over 3 games. What do you think of that? Is there any relevance to that?
I thought Sneaky was kind of the worst performer on C9 after Rift Rivals. I know he was sick, and even at Rift Rivals. And then a little bit afterwards, he was still ramping up, but I don't think he got back to the form that he was looking for all season long. I think near the end, like week 2, we were like, oh, here's where Sneaky finally showed up. And then this time, when he had Caitlyn, he still wasn't able to pressure enough because WE were able to kind of like release the pressure there with their whole map play. And I think that might have been a little bit of an indication that C9 were kind of learning how to get contracts to gank top with Impact and gank mid with Jensen and kind of leave the bottom lane alone. Because I feel like that was kind of the point that they didn't have, is they weren't able to play to the bottom lane as much as they would like to. And I think Sneaky's going to look a little worse for that, but I thought that he's not like as incredible as everybody kind of made him out to be after this series. I thought that Mystic outclassed him a bit.
Okay.
I think it's fair to say that, but I wouldn't necessarily say Sneaky was one of the worst performing players. I think that Cloud9 in general have issues with having their jungler play to more than one lane at a time, or like creating pressure or control between lanes, in particular with the sport. So I think that that's not necessarily a reflection on Sneaky. And in laning phase, you might even say that Sneaky and Mystic were whatever. So if laning phase was your complaint about Sneaky, then it's not that big of a deal. I would say that in situations domestically and also to an extent somewhat in group stage, there would be cases where Cloud9 would just screw up macro super early or something like this, and then Sneaky would have to outplay a team fight, or Jensen would have to outplay a team fight. And so I think in those particular situations, like specific members of C9 excel, but the fact that they're almost reliant on these types of situations and this type of playmaking from players it's a mark against the team as a whole.
Yeah.
And
was that a general trend then, that they were always behind in key games?
I think later on in the summer split, there were situations where they're behind in a lot of key games, like the CLG qualifying series was one that stood out. Obviously, the Dig series, where they were behind in some of the big games, and then like there would be a 5-man Baron poll, and Jensen would have to like ult everyone as Cassiopeia or something stupid, or Sneaky would have to play Xayah and then ult and get out of the situation and then use like so it was just I think that there were situations like that where C9 had to rely on individual outplays to kind of get to this tournament, and that's not necessarily the foundation that you want. And so for me, I don't necessarily want to condemn Sneaky and say Sneaky was like a terrible performer. He wasn't on par with Mystic, but Mystic had a team playing around him. Mystic had WE like in the late game more as a cohesive unit. So I do have some issues with Sneaky in this game, but I wouldn't say that, like, I wouldn't look at him and say, oh, you're the reason that this team lost. You're the worst performer.
I mean, he definitely didn't say it was the reason they lost, but he did say
I mean, I said, like, Mystic, like, outclassed him a little bit, but I also said, like, you know, I don't think it's really Sneaky's fault. I think the 2-on-2 right now doesn't matter too much. It's your team playing around you. If you go back to the Dig series, though, I would say that is a little bit Sneaky's fault, because I think Altec and Adrian were able to body them in the bottom lane. And that's where I was seeing, you know, that resurgence of, okay, that Rift Rivals performance where Sneaky doesn't look like he's on point. And then I felt like this game was more of, like you said, I hate it when C9 get behind and they really have to rely on those high variance plays to get back into it. And like you said, that's not what you want to see. And I think that punished them because they didn't really know how to keep their foot on the gas. And instead they were like, okay, it's okay that this Galio was able to shut down that pressure. Let's just wait a little bit. Jensen will get that Orianna shockwave eventually. And they're like, all right, double lock it against him. W is going to shut that down and stop the win condition. And they let that happen because they didn't keep the pressure up.
I think that's one of the biggest differences between, let's say, Westerners and Asian AD carries, that how the teams use a tempo and how aggressive they are. Like, if you play against Chinese team and they have a tempo and an item spike, they will dare you to fight. They will sit in your face with 5 men and wait for you to fight, whereas I feel like Western teams often are like, are we sure we want to take the fight here? Maybe let's wait 5 minutes, take the next window we have. So that's also why, let's say, Mystic shined more than Sneaky, because WE took more fights to benefit them than Cloud9 did in comparison. So just decisiveness during your own window is something that, like, the West itself has to improve on. And that's a big factor as well, why we perceive some AD carries as stronger and some as weaker.
Okay. Because I realized when we had that whole discussion on the last episode, which was like Sneaky versus Doublelift, like, first of all, they are coming from a fairly depleted talent pool. It's not like the region's just overflowing with like monster AD carries. So while obviously you can't just contrast what happened in this game against Mystic, who, as referenced before, was considered one of the best AD carries in the LPL, it's not like losing to him means you automatically lose that debate because they're not playing the same person. But I will say, I actually thought there was a surprising lack of sort of critique of any of the Cloud9 players after this series. Everyone did just focus on the draft. Because think about it this way. If you think about the current meta, in theory, if Jensen and Sneaky are as good as people build them as, they should be loving this meta. You've got a guy who loves to play tanks in your top lane for his entire career. Then you've got Jensen, fantastic laning mid laner. And then you've quite a large champion pool as well. And then Sneaky, in theory, can play a bunch of champions that he likes to play. So someone... it doesn't mean someone lost the game for you, but someone underperformed in this equation. So do you have something on that, Zirene?
Yeah, I want to say, like, if you think about like the current meta and the way that people are playing the game out, the way that C9 got a lot of their leads mid was contracts would show up, and then during this jungle timing you don't expect for the jungler to be there, Smoothie tag teams in, they would trident mid, they would like bring 3 people there, and Smoothie can't roam mid in this meta when he's playing Janna and Lulu. And you show up with heal, what are you going to do to that mid laner? You can't ignite him, you're not going to exhaust him. So there were things like that where, think about Afromu, right? He would roam mid with Bard. And in this meta, it's way worse for roamers to actually go out of lane. They're actually punished for it. And I thought that was something that stylistically they didn't adapt to. Because then at that point, it's only the jungler who's roaming around in the early game getting things done, and it puts a lot on contracts. And I thought he looked better on Rek'Sai than he did on these tank champions, because I thought he was way more comfortable playing an early active game with that champion as opposed to the rest. So I thought there was a lot on his shoulders, and I don't think that he was able to kind of keep up.
A good example for that is, for example, game 4, where contract set 1-7 and very bad game. The game legit was only lost because he sticked around for another camp after the blue invade. And maybe, as you said, he's used to Smoothie being there as well, like giving a backup or something. He dies there. And then, of course, against Italia Jarvan, it's very easy for Team W to dive you afterwards. But that legit was only one camp difference that maybe in the last meta where the support can help you, it wouldn't have been that bad. But in this moment, he was alone. He got caught out. He died. And then from that moment alone, I knew the game was over. Because, again, with Talia and Jarvan, who are so good at diving bot lane, nothing was there to stop them from setting up the play and executing.
Yeah, because you used to be able to use your mid laner, shove mid, and then on Sightstone back timing and Tracker's Knife, your support and your jungler both go into the bottom side jungle. You establish vision, and then you can be like, okay, next time we see the jungler here, let's go top side, ward there, and you just keep going back and forth. And now it's so hard to establish that because there's way less wards with the Ardent Sensor early. So you're kind of alone as the jungler doing that.
And that's funny because that's one of the reasons I thought before the tournament we're not going to see Ardent versus Ardent, because the lack of Sightstone would make roaming supports even better. So as we saw in SKT Misfit series, the moment Blitz or Leona gets ahead, there's no way of making the defensive vision that's necessary to stop you from bleeding out.
So I have a question along these lines then, right? And this isn't just looking in hindsight because Cloud9 lost, but that's one thing I'm a bit confused by, Kelsey, is that coming into Even Worlds, a lot of the reason why people were kind of a bit down on the Cloud9 bot lane is because it didn't really look like this meta plays into what Smoothie likes to do. And in fact, traditionally, you would think, especially because of the order of the matches, he just saw the Misfits versus SK Telecom game, you would think, shouldn't he have taken a stab at that? He's someone who wants to play Alistair, Thresh, Braum, etc. Shouldn't he have taken a stab at doing an Ignar and playing the off-meta picks and seeing what that did? What do you think?
First of all, I don't necessarily think that Cloud9 were even the best at executing like support run mid strategies or support coordinating with jungle strategies. I still think that there were some issues with like finding the right timing to shove out bottom and with priority roam with the jungle to certain parts of the map. I think that where they got most of their agency with their support on playmaking champs was like team fights. I think Smoothie was fundamental to setting up team fights for Cloud9 in a lot of situations. But the taking a stab at this particular meta, I think that particular situation, like the Misfits SKT series, played out the way it did because Ignar cannot play those champions. Like Ignar cannot.
But he was forced to do it. He didn't do it as like some intelligent decision.
It's not like some amazing revelation. Like Misfits literally were forced into a situation where they had to play this way, and it ended up working out because SKT like didn't expect it. But you see in game 4 like how SKT adopted their draft and the champions they were picking with like the Braum and the Tahm Kench. As soon as SKT figured out how to shut this down, there was like no way for Misfits to win after this point. I think like it was done. So I think that's something to really highlight and point out in this series that people aren't really talking about. So like as interesting and as exciting and innovative as that series was, and like as much of an impact as it potentially could have on the tournament, that series also had encased within it a way to respond to this kind of strategy.
Okay, but with that said, that is one thing that I wondered about in this tournament. Like, I understand Ignar would do it because actually everyone said coming in, even that was going to be basically his mode of operandus, but the part that confuses me is in almost every Worlds, part of how the in-tournament meta changes is whatever the really popular meta is, someone just figures out one counter that you can use in certain situations. Was this not an approach then that works more than like, say, one game in a series? Would you have to just do it as a surprise or something, Zirene?
I think it's a high variance play. I think actually when we get into that series, I think Bang and Wolf played like shit and they didn't respect that at all. And also I think that only happens with that you get to go off of Janna Lulu if blue side initiates a handshake and bans either Janna or Lulu, and then the other side goes, okay, I'm okay with this. So you can't have blue side every single game, so you can't be the ones who say, I'm banning Lulu. I'm going to first pick Janna, or you're going to go ahead and, give that over to me, right? Or you're going to ban it. And then we can start getting into these other ones where people don't want to play, Rakan into Taric. And then if somebody plays Rakan, you can play Thresh. So there's all these things that start going down. But I think blue side has to initiate the handshake and put the hand out first.
So let's talk about that series then. Let's just keep it going then. What did you think of this? Because this was obviously a primary aspect of that series, and Misfits being in a position where maybe they could have won it initially, despite what Kelsey says at the end there, where she feels like it was kind of figured out. So the Ignar somehow, it worked for him that he can't play any meta champions, right, Grabbz? How does that work?
Not to take anything away from Misfits, but I think I've never seen SKT playing that bad in an intentional best of 5 for a long time. And I felt like in every game, one player had a mission to int the game as hard as he can. Like SKT made very good decisions. Like if you think back about the Vayne game, for example, well, first of all, Bang legit runs it down level 1. Because I like the Vayne pick in a sense, because as soon as he gets his condemn, Leona can't lane anymore against Lulu Vayne. Like there's no way for her to engage. That way, SKT gets pressure. He runs in level 1, gets double killed. And then SKT makes a decision to swap... Also not swap back, but leave Vayne alone, which was very smart, because Jace and Kara, was it Kara? No, Jace and Lulu should be able to hold the tower. But then Huni sits in the bush, gets seen, and dies for no fucking reason. So,
that was so boosted. He literally saw them place that ward.
Yes.
And then he walked.
That ward is a standard ward for like a year. If you play your strong side, you put that ward down for TP play. Everybody does that. Like even Challenger Series EU, people do that shit. And then he does the play. So we have Bang who runs it down, Huni who runs it down, and then even Misfits barely wins the game. So overall, 3-2, Misfits played very well. Congratulations, but we should not oversell this victory and saying, the West is so close or something. Like SKT played very bad. Misfits punished that in 2 games. But overall, coming back, the question was the playmaking supports. I want to see that more. Obviously, in best of ones, the risk is too high because you need to get something out of those picks in the first 10 minutes, basically. If they get to Ardent for free, it's over. Like, they completely outscale you and you lose control of the game. So especially as a worst team, I think there's a huge benefit of trying the strategy out. Like, there's nothing of stopping you to say, okay, we know, especially in SKT, if we go to team fights evenly, we should lose. So let's do something early game. I wouldn't be surprised to see more of that in the later stages of my best of 5 going forward.
Okay. What do you think, Kelsey?
For me, it wasn't even necessarily just like early plays. Those weird things like Bang pushing too many waves top and then forcing. It was like almost a Fnatic-esque where like Bang is going for an extra wave top to push out, and then people force on mid, and Bang's not in position, and situations like this through the mid game that just enable it further. The fact that I think SKT get almost kind of baited by these, like, in a way, I shouldn't say cheese, but picks that you know what they're there for, right? And you almost like force them in anyway. The Blitzcrank, for example, in the Blitzcrank game, you know the Blitzcrank is there because one of SKT's strengths is controlling vision around Baron, right? And so what Misfits are doing with the Blitzcrank pick is like, I dare you to face check this almost. And then they do it. Like Huni does it several times throughout the game. And it shouldn't fucking happen, but it does. The question then, though, is like, is this SKT that we should expect, right? I think that's the broader question. Is this like, should we be saying, oh, okay, Misfits only made this series close because SKT had a bad day? Or is this just SKT and Misfits made this series close because this is just SKT?
I think that it's not SKT. And I feel like there's 2 big things there. The first one, I think, is Bang and Wolf played like absolute garbage. Like you said, those picks are there for a reason. They played right into it. They let Blitzcrank and the Tristana hit level 2 first, and they didn't back off. And then they got hooked and they lose summoners. And then they see these plays coming later, and it's already started. It's already begun to cascade, and you've already screwed up at that point. Because now the next hook is even worse. And then the next one, right? And then they start diving, and it ends up being this, like I said, cascading effect. But then you go to the next game with Leona. You know what's going to happen. In fact, Hansama almost screws up the level 1 because he jumps in and gets Ignar chunked. I actually think Hans Sama played pretty poorly the whole series, but I think Bang and Wolf played worse. Like, people came out of that series being like, Hans Sama's fantastic. I was like, Ignar is fantastic. Hans Sama doesn't know how to team fight in position, and SKT realized that, and they were like, oh, this guy's literally using Tristana as a crutch. Let's take that away from him. And then he was putting way less damage in fights. His positioning wasn't as good once he didn't have that pick. And everybody's going like, oh, yeah, I feel like Tristana is the Galio of AD carry, if I can put it that way, where it'll elevate those people. They have way more effective range. You don't have to care about positioning because you have repositioning tools. You have a knockaway. You have self-peel. So giving somebody who's not as good as you Tristana ends up looking like the way Hans Sama looked.
I want to go back to one decision SKT did before the tournament even started. And that's picking Huni over Untara. Just because Huni as a player is so resource hungry. And a meta where it's so mid lane and bot lane focused, having him there, like kind of having to pick him Jace because that's what he wants. He wants the pressure. He wants to have kill pressure on the enemy. That really surprised me back then. And it kind of comes back to bite SKT in the butt. So
I think it's good because I don't think Bang and Wolf are going to be the players that are generating pressure, and you have to get pressure from somewhere. Like, Bang and Wolf have never, like, you can think back and it's like people praise Bang as a team fighter or something like that, but Bang is never the player. It's Bang Wolf 2v2 is never the 2v2. It's just, oh man, I'm just like so afraid of SKT's bot lane 2v2. They're going to crush me. And I think that's actually something that has really hurt them, like, overall this summer in the meta in general, is the fact that they don't have a pressure generating 2v2. They can't control, like, bot side vision in SKT. Like, even when they had the roaming support meta, they couldn't, with jungle and support, roam because they wouldn't necessarily have, like, a lane crushing ball lane in any of these situations. So to me, it made sense. Oh, we're taking Huni. Huni's going to generate pressure topside. You can play these sorts of comps that, like, have pressure top and mid, and then you can use that pressure and transfer it to bot. Because I don't necessarily think this is a meta where you every game go in and it's like, our 2v2 is going to smash and this is going to happen. Like, you look at the Longju Samsung series, for example, where, like, you could have Longju playing these Varus bot lanes, right? But then you have, like, Shen and Talia, and they can't generate any pressure anyway because these, like, solo lanes are going to deter a lot of the playmaking you can have in the 2v2. So I think that is a setup that can be really effective for SKT, and in my head, this is kind of like what they were going for and how the series progressed as, like, Jace continued to show up or things like that continued to show up.
Okay, so I don't think it's Huni. Like, the whole trade-off is, oh, we need something that provides pressure, so let's take Huni. You're taking Huni regardless. The question here is Peanut worth taking over Blank? Is it enough of a stylistic difference to swap them in and out? Or would having Untara there be better because you have two mediocre top laners you can swap between that are stylistically slightly different? And I think Huni gets his ass in gear when Untara could possibly sub in, because Huni was inting a lot of those games. I think they took the wrong sub. I think there's no reason to run Peanut over Blank right now. Peanut has not looked like the way that he did before. His high-risk style is showing itself, and I think Blank is just way better for the way they like to play right now. Especially
going into that, you can only kind of pick top lane if you're red side usually. What happens is from blue side, people ban Jace. Huni will not get a positive matchup. And where do you go then where would you put your resources? On blue side, usually you want to have a safe tank and play on both sides. You have Huni, he gets his Jace, you play him with the jungle pressure top. That leaves you even more vulnerable on bot side to get bleeded out.
Well, they blind pick Jace like
that's
2
what
to
I
3
mean.
times.
Yeah. That's what I mean. I mean, of course, Jace is always the crutch.
They were obviously, when they implied they were going to flex into the mid though.
Jace is always the pick that even years back where it's like, you want pressure, you get Jace. There's not much that beat Jace early game, you will have it. But yeah, let's just imagine in semifinals, SKT's blue side to take Jace away in the first ban phase. We established already that SKT's bot side is not the strongest, so they don't necessarily have a winning matchup there. And then Huni doesn't get this winning matchup on top side. Suddenly, again, the whole game will be dictated by Faker if he plays well or not.
Yep.
Faker was a god.
Yeah. Legit.
Faker was so good.
Like, just to touch on the thing you said about the, like, whether you took the sub as the top laner or the jungler, the one part that I still don't get, like, I'd love to actually know what the real reason is, because, by the way, before someone's like, look, I've linked you to a Coma interview that Travis did, like, he doesn't tell us the real reason there for obvious reasons. But the reason why I would like to actually know why he made this move is because I even said this, go back on, like, a past episode, probably in the groups, before, I think it might have been the prediction one, and I told you 100% what would happen. It would start like this. They would always start with Peanut, then as soon as they lost a game, in would come on blank. Well, at that point in time, if that, what you're telling me there is, if things go badly, I can only rely on this other guy. Then why is the first guy there?
Exactly.
Why isn't the other guy just there all 5 games? This doesn't make any sense. Why are you giving the first person a chance to fuck up? It's a best of 5. There aren't 3 games you can give away.
And there's this narrative too. There's this narrative where people are like, he's going to watch backstage with Coma. I'm like, literally, you can do that and download this guy. You don't have to do it in the best of 5. I understand people play differently, like on the day. Go watch their VODs. Like they're gonna do that anyway. You're gonna no. I don't think watching this guy game 1 and 2, and then they're gonna pick Ivor in game 3 is really gonna let you figure out his routes. There's different picks, different pressure points. As a jungler, you almost never start the first 5 minutes of the game exactly the same. Even close to exactly the same.
Unless you're Svenskeren. But the point is...
Yeah, because he's remote controlled. What are you talking about? He doesn't make those choices himself. Before the game, Reginald tells him, listen, in Season 2, he used to just farm up all the jungle and then give me the buff. And then they're like, so, what's he saying? Oh, he's the owner. Yeah, sorry, I'll do that.
I will say that I think the difference between Blank and Peanut comes down a lot to how Blank is willing to play with lanes that have pressure versus lanes that don't. And when you see the way that Blank plays, like if the lane is losing and it shouldn't be losing, or like he should be in this lane, like ganking it because it's an even matchup or something, and suddenly the lane goes wrong, he'll just like put a ward there and be like, have fun, mate. And then he'll go to somewhere else where he thinks there is pressure. So if SKT are playing comps that have like multiple winning lanes, I think Blank is great. I think Blank is really smart. I think he's good at identifying like where the enemy jungler is in those situations, and then choosing the right camp to deny, or being able to isolate the enemy jungler and harass him, or in the 1v1 or anything of that nature. But if you're setting up the way that SKT have traditionally liked to play, which is like a few more losing matchups, scaling teamfight compositions, I think Blank falls a little short, and Peanut is more willing to like interfere with the lanes in those situations and things of that nature. So I understand, like, in theory, why Peanut might be an option. And you see, like, as SKT start drafting more winning lane matchups, like, Blank is doing better in this series as well. So I understand why they would play Peanut and why they would want Peanut for that nature, because I don't think Blank is ever going to be that jungler. He's not going to be that jungler for you. Whereas they feel like maybe Peanut could be, but Peanut has just been having so many problems this tournament that it's hard to really see that.
Yep.
What's so bizarre, though, is I actually think that has to be one of the biggest... I say this in the context that they might yet win Worlds, but even so, I think that them picking up Peanut has to be one of the... When you consider the level that SKT's on, right, where they could recruit almost any jungler they want, basically. I mean, I think the only one who was probably off the table was Score, because he was putting together the KT super team. That's about it. Almost everyone else would say yes if SKT asked them. So at that point in time, you can almost just look at the rest of your team and go, right, what do I need? Let's get that. And it's like they did the opposite to that. It's almost like Koba thinks he's going to, like, prove what an amazing coach he is by getting someone who's exactly the opposite of the style of jungler he's had all the success in his career with. And so that's the part I found so bizarre, because here's the thing. Everyone watching SKT now who's going to just bag on Peanut as though he's like shit. No, he's in a team that doesn't make any sense for him to play in. Go put him on a team where they need someone to just service the top laner with ganks all day. I bet he'll be fucking amazing again. I bet he'll have like MVP numbers and all these crazy pop-off games. But he's almost put in a team where it doesn't make sense as to why they recruited him specifically, especially when you consider, like, I also think as well, if you play in SK Telecom and you're a jungler, you also will just get propped up by the fact that Faker can actually play without a jungler for so many games. It's ridiculous. Like, no other mid laner in the universe is just fine with just, I'll take all the pressure all day long and barely ever get killed in ganks, and you don't even have to put any wards near me. Like, who else can do that? So I think I agree with the whole thing. It just doesn't really make sense to me what the logic is on, like, what they think Peanut's there for. Except, as you're saying, Zirene, some sort of, it's like almost, maybe this is it, okay. Maybe this is how much contempt they have for people who aren't Korean, that they think that this like shitty pantomime of like, oh, maybe I'll just use Peanut all the games, so do lots of preparation for him, and then they're like, oh, I've changed him out, you never saw that coming, did you? Maybe they think we're just so stupid because I mean, they're winning, that's actually a plan that works. Like, I think everyone knew coming in that's what they were going to do.
Yeah. Is he the decoy, right? Is it so they can't figure out Blank in 5 games? They can only do it in 3? Like, I don't know. I feel like yeah, there's no reason. I feel like that's also kind of a shell of his former self as well right now on SKT,
that's also what sucks.
stylistically.
It's just joyless to watch him play, isn't it? It's like it's the same with Huni though. Why have Huni and then tell him, half the games I want you to just play these tanks? Again, why recruit these players? You know, like you made almost exactly like if you win, I guess in a way I have to give you credit because you somehow did get players to play not really their style. But it just almost seems like are you trying to play the game on nightmare mode now? Is it like after you've won 3 worlds, you have to win with players who shouldn't even be able to play that way? And at the end, you're just like, right, I'm actually bored now. I've got all the unlockable characters and all the different skins, you know, like someone else have a go now. I'm just going to go retire or something.
I do think if you want your team to develop, you have to kind of, as SKT, you have to look at players like that though, right? You have to look at players who will be like super aggressive in top jungle 2v2 because this isn't necessarily something that you've always had. You've been more of a mid-focused team. You want to look at you've had a top side focus to an extent. I actually think that like something that's underrated in the SKT narrative is how they have played to top side a lot in in so many iterations of their team, like with the Marn iteration, the Duke iteration. They have played to top side quite a bit. So if you're kind of like thinking of progressing this even further, so let's just like go super ham and go with like these players who just will like 2v2 all the time. And so theoretically, I can see why they made this roster change in the offseason initially, because this makes some sense. But it just like it isn't working. And I think part of that is also even in the Duke iteration, for example, like communication between top and the rest of the team wasn't that great. You can argue that it was better in the Marin era, but like some of it, like let's be honest, some of that communication was like, oh, Bengi, come to my lane, let's gank, everything like this. So I think that there is a disconnect a little bit. It's like everyone always says that Edward Gaming and Aaron doesn't know how to coach top laners, right? Like it's almost to an extent, I feel like the same thing can be said for SKT with top jungle and playing to the side, even though they do that. It's almost like they kind of have lucked into it in some situations.
I do think that hurt them in this series because I think you're getting your 4-man, 5-man dove bottom lane because you're putting pressure top. And now the top in the meta right now is kind of like, if it's a split pusher like Trundle or Gnar, just ward for them, make sure they don't get completely screwed early, and like make sure you just, stop the jungler from getting up there. I remember there's like, he was playing Jace and like Blank legitimately went red to blue to red and then went into the jungle to find Sejuani, so that he did 3 camps. They were all buffs to get level 3, got Scuttle, and then he's like, I'm just going to protect Huni. That's all I'm going to do. And then bottom lane, it's like, well, what's happening there? Your lane's getting destroyed. And that could hurt SKT moving forward because they've been playing that top side, like you said.
So as you referred to before, I think it was Grabbz who said it, like in this series, the obvious standout player was Faker, and particularly it's got to be game 4, right? The Rise game, because funnily enough, you see other players in this same tournament play Rise, and people are like, why is he doing it? Like, what's their concept of what they're going to do with it? Like, Faker can do anything with this champion, apparently.
Yeah, he can save Huni from inting. He can like save the Trundle level 4 or 5. And it's like, it's insane. This guy like did not want to lose this series. And watching that one dive, like Misfits, there's a moment where they literally should have won the series over SKT when they dove turret. They should have won the series off of that. But Faker just turns it around like mid-fight realm warp. The guy is insane mechanically, and he understands when he should be doing something, when he shouldn't be doing something. And I think Power of Evil only looked good in this series in the final game. Otherwise, Power of Evil was kind of just like, I'm going to play Karma for the bottom side. I'm just not going to contest Faker. And then when he finally grew some balls and he actually like picked Syndra, he had the game in his hand. It's frustrating, but I think Faker was fucking fantastic.
One play in game 3 that describes SKT right now perfectly. That's the Vayne game with Faker was Stadia against Tristana, where he outplays, I think, 2 situations back to back with Tristana jumping him. And then the one moment he even looks at the Wolf, he insta-dies in the loser tower. Like, this tournament. I was so sad at that moment.
Like, he like Talia Wall interrupts Tristana jump at him, and then he just gets away
Wolf,
top.
And then Wolf takes the greedy path and just insta-dies the moment afterwards. And like,
on
right now.
On the other hand, I do think, like, so the game 4, the Ryze Jarvan 2v2, you play Ryze. And I think this is what people are getting wrong, is like you have to have strong jungle matchup, and you have to pressure that right away, because like Blank was there right away, and it was almost ridiculous that Misfits didn't expect it. But then you say that Power of Evil only really showed up in game 4. I actually think to an extent, game 5. I actually think to an extent, like, he misplayed that game like so heavily on a fundamental level, because you pick this Syndra, you understand, okay, he's picking it into like these terrain situations like the Jarvan, the Taliyah. It's going to be difficult to play, but obviously he's playing it for the ult on Tristana, because Tristana is an obnoxious champion and there are like very few situations where you can counter it. So obviously you have like the Syndra ultimate for this situation. He keeps using it on Huni. Like,
because Hootie's the easiest person to ulti. Exactly. And Wolf is right there on Tahm Kench next to Tristana. So I'm like, Power of Evil, I think he played it well because he realized this is still European Hooney. And he just kept going after him.
But it was like almost like this dire genius where it's like Hooney is pushing where the rest of the team has zero pressure. No. Oh my gosh, he's going, oh my gosh, I can get him. This is a free kill. We can transition to Baron. I'm going to ult Hooney right here, and then I'm not going to have the ult for a team fight against Tristana. And
Hooney's that guy who's like 0-3 and he types like after he's like Syndra ulti down. Is like that's his use in the team.
I mean, to be fair though, that was the only way Power of Evil could get pressure on the game, and not even by his fault, but how the draft went. I think the Tahm Kench pick was just so fucking good. Like, as a coach, I just feel like, okay, this game is over as soon as Tahm Kench came out. And especially, Faker Talia already, Orianna was banned, Kelsey will have the same issues with Jarvan, but have less pressure on Tristana, so Syndra was the only pick he could have done there, which would have made sense in the draft, and pressure-wise. So I think, even though Wolf misplayed a lot with his Tahm Kench, and especially he should not let Power of Evil go on the sideline plays. Like, Hooney should be able to play up if he has Tahm Kench, SKT at mid priority a lot of times. They should be able to prevent that play from happening. So, Hooney, of course, he's special in that kind of regard. But I think Wolf had a bad series, obviously a bad Tahm Kench game, but the pick itself just made it so hard for Misfits to execute their composition. Because if you look at the draft, until then, their comp looked really good. They had early game pressure with Varus on pressure bot lane. They had the Shen to make the life happen. They had Sejuani, of course, the meta jungler. And then Tahm Kench happened. And it's the first Tahm Kench pick of the whole tournament. So I think we should focus a bit as well on Tahm Kench and especially Braum in the 4th game as well.
Yeah, the Braum was good.
Like as I mentioned before, already those small adaptations SKT did. And on those, you can really notice how good this team is. Or I don't know which player, maybe it's Faker, maybe it's Koma, I don't know. Like maybe both, who called it out, but those picks in both situations were just genius.
It does seem like in this tournament, like even though Varus is considered part of the meta, it seems like it's lost a lot of games in this tournament. What's the issue with Varus at this tournament? Like, are people misplaying it? What do you think the problem is?
It's pretty simple. Varus is just the pick on lane against Tristana if you want to get pressure. And at the same time, of course, if you get Varus for that regard, you need to get something out of it early game. And most teams executed Varus badly, or they pair it with a Janna who then goes against Lulu, and suddenly you don't win bot lane anymore, but it's even. So like if you get the Varus, you should even get a stronger support, so you can actually punish the matchup and not go Varus Janna, because then you do nothing.
Yeah, I think Varus also, because of his lower effective range later in the game, if you're like an okay player at 80 carry at like the pro level, you're not going to be able to get as much out of this. And I think it's even more important that the support give a Varus the confidence to play in that range. Because when you watch Prey play this champion, he is balls to the wall. He's got his finger on QSS. He's ready to flash. He's ready to outplay these situations back in the group stage. And when you watch somebody like Hans Sama on it, he's afraid to walk up. Because when you're playing Varus, your defensive tools are not your own. Your support's got to peel for your ass. Your support's got to be on the R button with Janna. Got to have those abilities on point. Or else you're playing not at your 575 range. You're playing at like 600, weaving in and out, and you want to play like legitimately at like 500 range, so you can advance and retreat without losing autos. And I feel like that's what really gets missed out on here, is that the Varus player isn't good enough with their team to position the way you need to as a Varus.
Also, some of the Varuses, like Prey is probably the most frequent Varus player at this tournament. And I do think that the Samsung drafts or the Samsung setups into Varus were really smart. Like the game 2, you have the Shen Talia so that Varus Lulu can't like get what they want out of the bot lane necessarily. Because this is just a ridiculous amount of pressure from top and mid. Having globals, and then in game 2 they also even have like the teleport Lissandra, where theoretically you're shutting down like the playmaking potential of bot lane by having these picks in the other lanes, and then Varus becomes like less useful after that. So
yeah, literally I'm probably gonna say it one more time. The 2v2 doesn't mean shit unless you're misfits. Like if you're playing Varus into Tristana and you both have Ardent Sensor supports, I don't think the 2v2 means that much at all. I think it's way more important to control mid to control bottom and then have 4-man dives, because I see losing matchups get 4-man dives because they have priority all the time. I feel like the 2-on-2 doesn't really enable you that much at all. And then I feel like the Shen top lane, or if you have double TP, like it's way more important like what's going on with the map, because it's so hard to get anything done bottom lane because you don't have an aggressive summoner spell. It's just double defense on pretty much everybody.
One factor as well about actually Faker's performance in this series, like tying into kind of the historical elements of Faker, that I think is really worth highlighting as well, is that people who are maybe they haven't followed a traditional sport or this is their first esport might take for granted that like, oh, well, of course he carried all these games, he's the best player ever. That's like, it's actually very rare that the person who's also like the best and the most skilled and the most clutch is all the same person. Like if you look at a lot of sports, there's a lot of really clutch players who, you know, they weren't like the best player. And there's a lot of really, really like great players who were just all right in clutch situations. You know, like for example, okay, at something actually I would say is not a criticism of Bjergsen. It's just the way his career is. I think he wins because he's a better player. And by being a better player, you're going to win a lot of games. That's going to be a byproduct of being the best player. But I wouldn't say he's like the most clutch mid lane. I've seen a lot of situations where sometimes he did nothing, or he just didn't come up with the big play, or he didn't carry the big game, you know. Now, he's won a lot of those games. He's lost a bunch of those games. What's mad about Faker is he already would be a contender for like best player, most skilled player. Even like he'd be a contender for most skilled player with no championships. He'd be a contender for best player just because of the championships. But it's like on top of that to also be almost flawless in the big clutch situations. There's very few he's ever actually failed, like outright, you know? And also, even in games that he loses where he's very clutch, he never seems to have that moment that all the other really good players have, where he could like take that one team fight and be like, see, he should have taken this decisive move here, or he was afraid to do that move there. I think one of his best qualities as a player, and realize you have to be amazing to make this work, is it does feel like he never second guesses a single move he does. He just goes, right, this is the move I'm doing, and just does it. Now, yeah, you have to be the best to make it work, but it's so mad to have all that rolled into one person. Like, it almost defies belief, really. What's
so fascinating is, I mean, we all know Faker plays very aggressively and kind of dares the enemy team to gank him because he can outplay it. He does not change that playstyle in a game 5. Shows his mental strength, and that's the most important part. I guess he gets even more aggressive in the best of 5 in the 5th game. Like, he even gets it both to the walls, gank me or lose the game, basically. And as you said yourself, I mean, I think that's the magic of Faker as well. This mindset to have, I am the best, and I will show you why, and there's nothing that stops me, basically.
And also, just cruises into every international tournament, and it's always, somehow this is always a low-key factor. I don't know how, but the first thing I would mention about Faker when he goes to any international tournament is, oh look, it's a totally different year, totally different meta, and again, Faker can play like 6 champions. Like, is this just going to be the same case every fucking year of my life? No one else can do that. Or at least they can do it if they're in, like, you know, the NA LCS. Yes, you can. Maybe you could do it there, you know.
Oh, he's fucking insane. Like, you think back to the times where, you know, the guy played Riven mid and people were like, wait, what's going on, right? And then he's
undefeated on it. I think he was like 8-0 or something mental, yeah.
He was playing LeBlanc when people said it was like a crap champion, and then it got better, and people were like, oh. And then people were like, oh, Faker played Galio mid. And now everybody's like, oh, we should really start adopting that more, even though, like, you know, not completely the originator of it, but still, Faker, people talk about SKT not having a lot of innovation sometimes, but I feel like Faker is always got something. You even think about, like, I think 2 years ago, he's the only person who played like Kassadin at Worlds and even busted out in the finals. Yeah. And he was one of the only people playing Rise. Like, Faker always knows what he's good on. That's the thing, is like, he doesn't care like what's good. He's good on the champions across, like, not even the meta, across Faker's pool, and he always keeps that up because he has such a crazy drive. Like, being number 1,
Like I was like number 1 in like World of Warcraft 3v3s, 2v2s, right?
Okay.
On my battleground. You lose motivation because you're like, if I play a game, literally all I have is I will lose 20 points and I will win 10. If I lose a game, it takes me twice as long to get back to where I was. And Faker has been able to just stay number 1 for so long and not lose that motivation of being the best from what I've seen throughout his career. And it's insane that he is here for the 4th time in the semifinals, and he looks good on everything. And that game solidified it for me that Faker is the best player at Worlds right now, because his whole team was inting different games, and Blank was like the only person who was like, you know, I won't do that. I won't do you like that, Faker. And he was able to, you know, win the match.
Yeah, it was I think it's funny because I almost feel like Faker is aware of this kind of power, because it's like I remember 2015 or something where he managed to convince several EU mids that Aurelia was like actually legitimate as a pick or something just by playing it. But it's like Faker is able to just really have this kind of control and this kind of power individually in the game. Like repeatedly, I remember we did the episode with Wicked where we said, okay, this isn't a meta. Like we're finally at a point where an individual can't like hard carry or anything like this. Like you're not going to see a standout individual player at Worlds. And then it's like this guy's like, well, this is what I fucking think of that, basically. And I don't know. That was a really great series to watch just for that aspect alone.
Yeah. Plus, also, like, I actually think, in a way, I don't blame people, because when you've been that excellent for so long, in a mad way, that becomes your everyday reality. So it's almost mundane when Faker's this good. Like, but actually, what's funny is when people see these games we're talking about now, like Game 4, Game 5, they'll be like, oh, well, that's just Faker. Like, no, you have to understand the context of history, right? Even when someone's the best, they eventually fall off. You know, eventually there's a year where that's how the next best person gets crowned. Someone else comes up, he takes his spot. Now you go, oh, he used to be so good a year ago. That just never happens. Like at the moment, Faker almost has to retire or just keep playing for like 5 more years or something before we're going to see that, apparently.
Like, if Faker retires, I'm going to be so upset, because forever, there will always be the conversation of, well, they're not as good as Faker. If another person came along, they're not as good as Faker. Then they wouldn't get the opportunity to do it, man. He's like the Floyd with Mayweather, dude. Except he's like way more entertaining to watch.
Sure.
And then if you have like a situation where a Western team is able to be competitive and like can win Worlds, and Faker has retired, it's like, well, it doesn't count. There's no fucking Faker SKT, so.
Yeah, but I also do think that is a factor, though. Like, you know, for example, people have now caught on to this trend that it's not really relevant where you finish at Worlds, because really the question is just when did you face the Korean team? I think we should go further than that, right? Forget that works for like general teams. Like, it's a pretty good acknowledgement of like how like China did against the West, for example, if you just use that factor. But I think a better one is when did you play SK Telecom? Because like obviously whenever you play them, you're out of the tournament. Like no one's ever beaten them, so it's actually kind of fucked in that sense, you know?
Yeah, it's like, oh, Samsung Galaxy made the finals, but if you would swap their position with Rocks, it's probably Rocks in the finals, right? So it's just when you run into SKT, especially as a Korean team, that's how far you go. Oh yeah. Speaking of Korean stuff, something about this series that I kind of need clarification on, and I hope you guys are able to give me some. The community started saying things like, you know, thank God Misfits didn't play the Korean style. And I have no idea what they're talking about. Like, is that the picks? But I literally think like Korean style is great basics. I feel like Korean style is now just like a buzzword that is empty.
I hate that term.
Meaning.
I hate that term because there's like this idea that there is a Korean way of playing the game. And I think I even... There was like some Twitter conversation I had with Locodoco, and I don't want to misrepresent his words, and like his best response was something like placing the team before the individual players. It's like, that's just how you're supposed to play, right? Like that's not, There's not a Korean style of it. It's really bizarre also because it almost implies that each Korean team plays exactly the same way when there's a huge variety, right? We have Longju, who managed to stumble at this tournament in part because of how they play, and then you have Samsung, who I think are actually a team that are insanely adaptable. Like, one of the low-key factors about Samsung is this year and last year, they have developed and adapted and changed the kind of team they are over the course of Worlds to an extent, which is really impressive. And then you have SK Telecom, who I think in their heads, people have this idea that this is the Korean style, but it really is just SK Telecom. They're the ones who have really, really perfected this losing early game sort of setup, playing really good vision control around Baron, having good, being able to bounce the side waves really, really effectively so that you have side lane control and then you can just soft reset mid. These types of setups, and this isn't necessarily, and once you get to that part, is this Korean style? Is this SKT style? Is this how you play good mid game? That then becomes that question. What about this is Korean style? What about this is SKT style? There isn't one, right? It doesn't. It's a weird term that doesn't make any sense. And when you talk to teams, even Misfits themselves will say, we play Korean style. What does that mean, Misfits? I don't even understand this.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is,
I talked to Empire. I talked to the analyst from Misfits, and I'm like, what does this mean? He's like, I actually think people just have it wrong. I feel like, even they're saying oh, they didn't play a Korean style. He's like, we're literally playing the same style of League of Legends as the Koreans. So it doesn't make sense in and of itself that they're saying Misfits didn't play Korean style.
I think it's very simple, and people are just blinded by flashy plays. In every sport ever in history, you win if you minimize your own mistakes. And that's what Koreans do more. Koreans generally do less mistakes in games than Westerners do. That's why we have games in EU, Origin against ROCCAT, 70-minute game with 500 kills or something. Yeah. People love to see that because it's Crown Fiesta. And then we have in Korea with games when 4 kills happen, but the team just wins because it don't do mistakes, it don't have openings. And this Korean style basically just means a team which knows how to win the game, and they don't do mistakes that hinder them winning the game. Yes. That's just it.
So here's a great. I'll give you a great example. Okay, Grabbz. I can't remember the specific games off the top of my head, right? But I know that one of them. Okay, I'll contrast a perfect analogy for how what on paper looks like the same game is entirely different, but gives this analogy for the styles. Okay, is I remember, I think it was in season 4. You might remember this, Zirene. There was a game, I believe it was Dignitas. And they lost this game, but it was one of those games where, you lose and the other team maybe gets 3 kills. And the whole scenario is that you lost a little bit early and then you were just in bad spots over and over again. And then you try to do what you think's the best move in that spot, but you just lose the game, you never really got a real opportunity to get back in the game. And so even though at the end of the game you say well done to the other team, for keeping up the pressure. The difference was, I remember, I think it was the very next season in Korea, there was a similar game to that. It might have been Jin Air, I can't quite remember. It was a Korean game which was similar, right? In that, someone got 2 kills and then won the whole game. The difference was, in the Korean game, even the team that lost the game was making the perfect decision at all points of the game. It's just that the other team was slightly more perfect, or, had the response to the counter. And the reason why I bring up these two games is, in theory, it sounds like the same scenario, but actually one just shows that it's not a style. They're just way better at making their own approach to the game work. And the other one was both teams on a lower level trying to do the same thing. And I think that's kind of the gist of this conversation here. There's a famous saying, okay, that you often say, because it's a scientific fact, that you can use to counter anyone who's a racist, right? Which is what you say is, if you ever look genetically, there's actually more variation inside a racial group than there is between racial groups. As in, if you just said, this is what all people from this area of the world are like, there wouldn't be a massive difference between an entire race and an entire race elsewhere. But within one group of a race, you can get, think about how an incredible amount of variation you can have. I think it's the same with all styles in the regions in League of Legends. Because, for example, example, as we said here, like SK Telecom contrasted against Longju, there's almost no similarities, right? Like what is similar about these teams? They play on almost all positions entirely differently. I think it's more that people just look when Koreans are really good, and obviously Worlds filters the good teams to get them to Worlds, and then they say, right, whatever they're really good at, which by the way usually just means, again, because of the meta, you have been pre-selected to be really good at this meta in theory. You then think to yourself naively, well, I think Koreans are the best and have the best coaches, therefore they reverse engineered this style. No, it's the other way around. Like they just, they did reverse engineer it rather. They didn't think up the style, they reverse engineered what made sense. So, for example, you go through any period in history and all the great Korean teams, like the absolute best ones, nearly always the meta suits them. Like I think, for example, I remember in season 4 was when we had this massive like collapse in the Korean scene. You had all the top teams before that was like SK Telecom, Blaze, KT Bullets, all of them fell off, right? And at the same time they fell off, the teams that initially replaced them was like Samsung Blue, was like Najin Shield, right? So Najin Shield used to literally give the fucking buff to the top laner because he was their best player and let him just shit on all the other top laners, right? No other team played like that in the entire world, by the way. Then you go and look at Samsung Blue, right? Do you think that Def just said, I better get really good on fucking Kog'Maw and I can't remember what else he played. Maybe like Tristan or something. Let me think, what was it? Kog'Maw and...
Corki? Who's good at Corki?
Ezreal.
Yeah.
Right, yes, Ezreal, I think. Okay. And so whatever. He didn't go, I'm going to get really good at these. He's played those his entire career, even when they weren't the main meta champions. That's why his team were the best. They played to their own strengths and then the meta. That's it. Like they didn't have a style that they all copied and then they were just the best at it. Other people couldn't do their style, like Najin Shield, so they didn't attempt to. They went with their own strengths, and if you were the best team within the meta, then maybe you could be the best.
I mean, that's also something that's very important to me because I have this kind of war going on in Europe, but people don't realize it, and I kind of get annoyed by it. That League of Legends is a game ever changing, of course, every 2 weeks. So what doesn't change are the fundamentals of the game. What is tempo? What are recall timings? What is pressure? Whatever. And those questions are not answered correctly in the West at all. And people are so hung up on those specific scenarios 50 minutes into the game. Where League, you will never have the same scenario ever again in the game.
Yes.
There are too many champions, too many situations. You will never have the same situation ever. And often scrims, because like Sven said again, at least the Koreans play the scrims out. And I know for a fact we didn't. Yeah. I often said after 50 minutes, stop the game here because we did so many fundamental mistakes already. We have to iron out before we get to specialization. And that's something that we just don't grasp in Europe, I feel like. We're so hung up on, let's say, the Korean playstyle. Maybe SKT plays like this because they have the fundamentals down and then they can build up from those fundamentals and do something else. But we still make, like, Fnatic, our third best team, doesn't understand sidewave pressure. They don't understand back timings. They do the simple mistakes, and that's why we're so far behind. And that's get me so angry when I always hear that the Korean style and we have to play like them. No, first get the fundamentals.
Here's the funny thing, Grabbz. I can actually give you an analogy from CS that's exactly like that. So in CS, obviously, we don't have Koreans, but the equivalent sort of is Europeans, right? Because there's no Asia, basically. So Europeans in general have won the most championships and have the best teams. And famously, NA is sort of like the second best region generally because it's mainly Europe and North America who's playing the game. And famously, to this day, every NA team that comes over for like a few tournaments in Europe, so, they do a boot camp between and they just stay in Europe instead of going flying backwards and forwards constantly, they will always in interviews rave about how much better it is to practice against European teams and how they play properly in scrims. And here's the part that doesn't work right. Back in the day when there weren't very many good NA teams in CSGO, you could make that excuse because you could be like, the problem is, I've seen the way they practice, but I go home and I don't get this practice against them. The reason it doesn't work now, and this is where the analogy is going to tie to League of Legends, is that now in CSGO, NA actually has quite a lot of resources and funding, and they've had a bunch of top good teams for a while now. So they have like the 4 or 5 good teams that if they wanted to tomorrow could implement exactly this practice that in isolation they all complain about not having. So basically, they complain, but then they turn around and choose not to do it themselves. So the same thing's happening in this example you're giving here. So if TSM's crying, right, that, the Koreans play out the scrims, well, you, Cloud9, G2, Fnatic, get a boot camp together, all agree to play out the scrims. You won't do it, of course, because the reason why you won't do it is because I'm sure when you're playing a game, as you're referencing here, Grabbz, someone will be like, pause, or, remake the game, or, for example, I think it was H2K said, because of translation things, they used to just literally pause a scrim and be like, we have to translate something to nuclear here as to what's going on, like, that's not what they're doing, is it? So you're choosing to deviate from the practice approach. It's not the Koreans just do it all right,
Exactly. I just think, again, as you said yourself, you should not just imitate blindly. They can do that because they have the fundamentals down. That's just it. They have more time for that. We don't in Europe. We should look at wave control, back timings. I still see people backing when the junglers or not backing when the junglers in base to get caught up and die. And this stuff should not happen. And that's just stuff that Korea does less. They still do it.
Also, I just want to say, by the way, let me just interject this a second, right? So I just did a video on this topic, so it's fresh in my mind, right? Imagine this. So think of all the stupid plays we've seen Huni make this year, right? Imagine any game you want where he made a stupid play. Right, what happens is, Coma's just about to talk, and then in walks the owner of SK Telecom, and he sits down and he says, Huni, I don't want you to die in the next 3 games. Would never happen. That happened to TSM. That happened numerous times. That's what Reginald has done again and again. Right? In what universe has that ever happened in any Asian team? It doesn't even just say, like, you've got to play better. It tells you specifically it's like he's given, like, his player a new quest in the game, Now he's got, like, he's got a new objective, Don't die 3 times in the next game, and you get some sort of medal from Reginald. It's like, come on, what is this?
There was that interview I saw on Reddit where it was like, Bang came out after the Misfits game, and he said, bot laner's most important job is to not die.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure Como was like, Bang, we need to talk. After that Misfits game, what are your jobs? And like, Bang's going to come to the own conclusion, right? Maybe I shouldn't die. Maybe I should. They know what they did wrong, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing, is you don't have to put that external pressure on them. They know what they did wrong.
Yeah, I also think that this is something Bang has said before. So watching the series, I had it in my head. It was very humorous. But and the other thing is like the blanketing of Korean style is like, don't tell me that like fucking BBQ Olivers and Ever8 don't understand, like,
exactly the same.
They have problems too. They're not playing out every scrim. They're not like they don't have fundamentals. Like when have you ever seen BBQ Olivers play perfect macro? It doesn't happen, right? So it's not that it's
Kelsey, a better example would be pick some of the teams that used to have really good players on. So what, Marin just went to Freaks and just forgot how to play entirely macro on the whole game, did he? He just doesn't understand it anymore, even though, in SK Telecom, people would swear this guy was a genius and had based the whole team around him and shot called everything into position. No, he didn't do any of that shit, did he? When he was in the team, they were coached well, they played practices properly, they understood what they were supposed to do in those games, and guess what? After that, he's on his fucking own, isn't he? With his new coach, his new team. It doesn't carry over.
And that's kind of been like the snake oil salesman for like Korean imports, right? Is people see them do incredibly well, and then it's like, oh, we should get them because they'll bring that Korean style over, or Korean coaches, right? It's like, no, literally every team is different. You're not going to tell me the Afrika Freaks and Jin Air play the same as Samsung or like SKT. They're very different.
Yeah, and this is like the moment you're importing a player to teach you the game, like that's the moment where you're definitely importing for the wrong reason.
Worked out for Envy.
I mean, as a coach who got Korean imports a lot, there's a factor people often forget that it's not always this holy grail Koreans. It's just, we have little information on players in general, how the personality is. Yes. For example, I can bet if I have 2 players who have the same mechanical skill, the Korean, on average, will have better work ethic. And I should take him because he will put in the work, a European might not. And that's something many teams also put into consideration. We had many prospects in Europe as well, like new players. We took Badit because I thought to myself, okay, we can get a random guy from Europe or a random guy in Korea. If I do this 100 times, the Korean should have better work ethic at least 60 or 70 times.
I mean, you say this, but I also think a problem with that is that, like, to an extent that will be the case, but I also think that if a Korean player like wants to win worlds, there's literally no incentive for him to go somewhere else. Like, really, unless you're Huni or something and this one-off shoot, and then you have to take no, even rookies. Like, if you're a rookie player, like, you're going to be so many years in another region, like, theoretically, tried and true, the best way to win worlds or the best way to prove yourself or to be the best is to stay in Korea if you're a Korean player. Like, there's no rookie is thinking, right, what are my plans to win worlds? Because no one is. Come on. First thing, in like, Korea, if he wants to be the best player, like, why would you leave Korea?
Okay, so let me answer this then. If you're a Korean player, how did you even get the offer as a rookie to go to a Western team?
they looked up the Korean solo queue ladder and they're like, oh, this guy's here. I'm going to literally watch none of his games.
So basically what you're saying is he wasn't on a Korean team yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, well, what he played
the Korean method
games in the
Korean method is like old school 80s video game where you don't think about completing the game. You have to get through this level. And to get through this level, you have to work your way to the end of the level and then beat the boss and you get to the next level. And all you're trying to do is not die and get to the next level. You're never thinking complete the game because you have to complete each level. So Korean teams, I can tell you the way they work is unless you are some faker level talent who can just be scouted out of nowhere and put into a starting spot in a team, your first job when you first start playing the game is you hopefully get onto a semi-pro team and start to like get a little bit of attention. Or if you're really lucky, maybe you become a practice partner for not even a good team, MVP or someone like that, You become a practice partner, and each time, this is actually your whole career is in each of these moments. These are like each a test. If you can sort of beat someone out in like a 1v1 practice against the top laner of that team, you might not get picked up by that team, but another team might pick you up. You gradually work your way up like that. There's like, it's only in the West you could basically come in, be the rookie of the year and potentially be on the best team. Like in Korea, you could never have a plan like I will be on SK Telecom. That will almost never happen,
But even if you just want to improve, like even if you want to be a better player, why would you leave the Korean environment?
I have to disagree here. I mean, maybe for the environment, but that's also why in football or soccer, loan systems are in place. Because game time on stage is also equally important. You're not going to progress as a player if you're not on stage getting that experience. So maybe it's easier for you to get it somewhere else in Europe or in NA. Like, let's say Oli, for example. I think some Korean teams will look at him and be like, this guy played really well on Immortals. Maybe he's good enough for us as well. Maybe he wouldn't have had the same chance staying in Korea. Yeah. So you have to go from case to case. Of course, if you're like Faker, of course, staying there is better. But if you're like not getting the breakthrough you want, maybe that's a step you should take to get your name out.
But how much better has like Ole really gotten in terms of fundamentals? I feel like he still makes like some of the same mistakes, like the super over aggressive plays, like he's looking for openings that he made on HK. Of course,
there was an example about what can happen. Basically,
I'm saying like if you're motivated to be better as a player, like I just don't see. Sure, you get some stage experience, but like what exactly quality of stage experience are you getting? If you're choosing between like LCS ROCCAT, which didn't place well like the year before this year, right? If you're choosing between EU LCS ROCCAT and potentially like a Korean in-house team, like to me, I feel like it's really difficult to say I will learn more at ROCCAT as like an outsider, as someone who doesn't necessarily know enough about the environment. And maybe they do think that they can learn more on ROCCAT, but I just find it difficult to believe given the track record of LCK teams at international events. Not even just like the top LCK teams, but the track record of like mid-tier OGN teams or lower-tier OGN teams, to think that like you would learn significantly more or learn more, or this would help you be a better player to go.
Okay, so here's the thing. If I isolate the factor you're giving, which is be the best, improve, and let's just say as a byproduct win worlds as a result of that, right? Yes, if that was the only factor in play, I agree that would be the most logical choice. But as another aspect I was kind of referencing there is sometimes you just never can make it through the Korean system. Like you might get 2 chances ever and you fuck them up and that's it, you're done. And you just sat as a bench player on some team. There's actually not that many transfers in OGN. You don't just go, oh well, I was the sub for SK Telecom, so surely I'll get a tryout for MVP. No. You just sit as the sub for everyone at SK Telecom, right? So do you remember a guy called Pickaboo? He was a potential MVP candidate, made the final of OGN. Do you remember before that? No, you don't, because he just sat as a sub playing the odd game. Do you remember after that? Yeah, just nothing. That's it. That was his whole career. He had 1 shot at it. He did pretty well. That was it. He's done.
Theoretically has had tryouts for foreign teams since then that have not gone well. So I don't think it's just like
he's a good example of a sub. Most of them don't even get that, They get the 3 chances and then they're done. It's out for them at that point in time. So I don't think the reason why this argument doesn't really make sense on either side is none of these players actually, I think, are people within grasp of Worlds who are going to the West. Like, only people who go to the West are rookies where you're gambling on them. That's why you'll get them and that's why they might leave. Or people who feel like they already want the money, in which case they're already essentially, to go to your point, saying, I don't care about winning Worlds. Like Spirit, when he goes to Europe, is saying, I don't anymore care about winning Worlds. I want to have a really good career in Europe. You know, that phase of my career is done. I think he knows that going into it, right?
Yeah, I mean, but the reason why I point this out in terms of like the work ethic issue is that it doesn't always fundamentally make sense to me, because if you're a European player and you want to fundamentally improve, you don't have the option of going to LCK, right? Or of like
no, but you could go to NA LCS, and some people do stay in the ULCS.
I don't necessarily think like broadly you can say, on average, the work ethic of the Korean team, of a random Korean player, will always be better. Like, to me, I just feel like that's a very difficult claim to make.
I think that does stand up. The idea, because here's another reason why. The reason why, on average, the Korean player would have a better work ethic is because, first of all, who the fuck are we comparing against in the West? What, you only comparing Bjergsen to this Korean player? No, we're comparing a random Korean player who could be an LCS with a random LCS player. So we're not talking about Bjergsen now, we're talking about random player, you know, anyone in LCS. Secondly, you've got to also consider that you almost, and except if you are completely scouted out a solo queue, you actually basically can't even make it in the Korean scene without work ethic. Like, you will just you'd never even get to SK Telecom if you didn't have the work ethic. It doesn't matter how talented you are. That's actually why I can't speak to Huni, because I don't know what he was like as an early player. But some players like a Huni who would have the talent to do what we've seen, you would never hear of them if they only stayed in Korea, in my opinion. And the fact that you need less work ethic already in the West, I think is a good reason for some people to go there.
But the other thing is that you already have some more information on players like Kuni, because you've imported someone who's like already on the Korean farm system. If you're literally just looking up someone on a solo queue ladder with zero experience, like zero team environment, and comparing two people on like the EU ladder or the Korean ladder with zero team environment, zero knowledge of like, this is what it takes to be on a team, this is what it takes to work hard. I don't think you can like baseline say that on average, the Korean player will always have a better work ethic.
Why do you keep saying that sentence there? It sounds like you don't understand the word average, because you keep saying on average, I wouldn't say that it's always the case. I mean, does it work like 70% of the time? It works 100% of the time. What is that? I'm confused by that sentence. Legitimately.
Okay, what do you mean? Like, I'm trying to define, like, he's saying that chances are you take like a random.
Yes, so on average. Right. That's fine. Got that.
Yeah.
But why do you keep saying always?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just an idiot and I don't know how to speak English. Like, I'm not trying to.
No, I genuinely am trying to strongman your argument here and make it as good as we can.
Are you taking the average, or are you taking just a random player?
I'm just like
I'm not saying there's no, like, example, Maxlor has an insane work ethic, for example.
Okay.
There are players like that in Europe, right?
Yeah.
But just because of course, if I try to play in Europe, he will try hard for his life. He will not have the same person you will have later on. He will talk more. He will be a different person completely. I had that many times already. Okay. And so if I have to take a shot in the dark, two players who are equal in skill, I would take the Korean, because on average I can expect a higher work ethic, and that was all my point basically.
I mean, I'm kind of disagreeing with this. Like, if
wait a second, let me just give if there's one thing I'm pretty good at, Kelsey, it's called follow-up questions. So here's a follow-up question for you.
Sure.
Do you think that on average Koreans are equal or less motivated in work ethic than Europeans?
Depending on. Not
depending on anything. It's an average. Yes, it's an average. Yes. If you import a Korean to Europe, would he be equal to or less good at work ethic than the European on average?
I mean, I don't. I think it can be about the same, because you hear the stories of like the really motivated. Yeah, because you hear the stories of the really motivated Korean players, right? You hear those stories, like they change the team environment, everyone's super motivated. But you also hear the players who like come over and they like try really hard for a couple of weeks, and then maybe they either like give up or they just get homesick, and then they're out drinking every night. Like, these players also exist. So I don't necessarily
think we've gotten somewhere then. I understand now, right? Because the problem is, since you were just saying that you basically just negated a statement, but you didn't give your own version. What you had to do was tell us whether you thought, like in your case, you just think that work ethic's purely personal and that you don't think there's a trend overall. But it sounded before like you were implying that like the European would be more motivated or something.
There's evidence to suggest that there's like higher value placed on certain work ethic fundamentals, like in Korean culture. But if you're leaving like the Korean environment, or if you're saying, okay,
you won't have the same environmental stresses to help you
I don't necessarily think your values are going to be like focused on improvement as much. Like, not always, right? Players.
See, that's the reason, though, why I do actually think that people don't do it right in as much as I don't think that just the Korean coach is the solution. But the reason why I would like people to have Korean coaches is get Korean coaches and have Koreans and do it simultaneously and just tell the Korean coach, listen, you're not going to coach SK Telecom here, but what I want you to do is, with the Korean player at least, have it the kind of strict nature that you have in Korea. I think that would be a decent link up, but they don't tend to do that very often, unfortunately.
Well, the thing that I think is something that we should consider here as well is the environment of solo queue and the population of players and how that lights a fire under your ass. Because there are 200 challenger spots. Let's just use that as an example, right? And let's just use an arbitrary number. Let's say there's 7,000 players in Europe, right?
Right.
How many are there in Korea? And how close is the scrim house? You get an invite. You are on a train from Busan to immediately to Seoul to be like, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's get this tryout. So it's easier to try out players in Korea. And players are very accessible. And solo queue is so competitive because there's so many people. It's such a popular game competing for the same number of spots. So naturally, it's going to weed people out who have a bad work ethic. They'll fall off the ladder. They'll stay low on the ladder. Those types of things. And the people who go to the top, that's why people actually give them tryouts, because not only are they good players, but they're showing that they can make it to the top of the ladder, which is not an easy feat to do when you're competing against everybody else who's trying to accomplish the same thing. Because that is essentially, you hit number one, you got to try out 3 hours away by train ride immediately. So I feel like the Korean environment and the way that it's set up and the way that the game is so popular there is something that creates this natural competition that you don't get in a place like NA. Like, people complain about the solo queue here all the time. It's not competitive because it's not saturated with players who are all near the same level, right? You take the top 1% of players of a pool of 1 million players versus the top 1% of players of like 5 million players. And they're all competing for the same spots. It's definitely like a supply versus demand thing with challenger players that you can only have so many of them. And so the competition is naturally better and they get weeded out if they're not up to par. Because guess what? If you aren't willing to work, there's this ranked 10 player over there, 3 hours away by train ride. I'll get his ass over here, and you're going to have to work. They can do that in a heartbeat. And that's why I think they utilize subs a whole bunch now.
I think to an extent that's true, but part of the issue with the population argument is that obviously there are factors. Otherwise, China would be the most dominant region in basically any sport, and you wouldn't ever be able to contest them.
And I think that the issue in China, though, is that they don't do that in terms of like, quote unquote, like not threatening the players, but saying like, you are replaceable, right? And I think that the Chinese players get a little bit spoiled. I think Imp is a fantastic example about this, where, he could slack off, right? And what are they going to do to him, right? It's like, he's Imp. Those types of things.
I mean, and part of that, again, is also different, like, cultural values, because I think to an extent the loyalty aspect almost gets emphasized more in Chinese team environment. So this is again a different value, but so I do think that there are some factors like that. But the question then becomes like, if you're removing that player from that environment, can you expect the same sort of situation? And I think the answer is that it's not consistent from what we've seen so far. Like, it's really kind of a gamble. And so for me, it's difficult to say like this rank 7 Korean solo queue player who's never been on a team before will generally have a better work ethic than this rank 7 EU player that's never been on a team before. I don't think that like you can generally make a judgment call on that. So
no, I think you can, just because, as we said again, there's a cultural difference. It's a gamble anyways, right? Both players are a gamble in any way. And I feel like in Korea, it's just a more competitive culture. And that breeds people with better work ethic.
I think if the rank 7 player agrees to come to EU LCS or a lower tier EU LCS team, then maybe that player isn't going to have necessarily that same work ethic that will allow them to grind through the system and become a really strong player in the LCK. Like, I don't know. I don't necessarily think you can make this assumption.
All right, I hardcore derailed us with
the question of Korean style play. Like,
I mean, I have to say, by the way,
this could be an entire episode.
Sure,
like,
we'll wrap this up. But I will say one point on that, by the way, that makes it very difficult because there isn't really a control group because League of Legends is actually the only game I'm aware of where you have so many new players who come in every year to be top pros, even in top teams. Like you see world-class teams, like, okay, EDG is a great example. Like, they didn't say, oh, this Coral 1 guy used to be really good, can't have him anymore, better get the second best top player. No, they just went and got a guy you've never fucking heard of, who was like a support player. Wait, transition to that. And likewise, they do this in a bunch of Korean teams, in Chinese teams. There's no other esport game I'm aware of like that. Like, if you really are the top team in another esport, you do just go and get the best player available in that position. You, like a traditional sport, you offer him a contract. You know, you don't go, right, I'll gamble on this complete rookie. Now, unfortunately, obviously, you have to factor in the meta changes all the time. In theory, because in fact, I've always thought that's a reason why you get new players is because in a way, experience carries over, but it also is sort of like a new game every 3 to 4 months. You can start with that new guy, and if he has all the ideal start conditions, you go, right, I'm starting with a clean slate here. I'll show this guy exactly how we want him to play the game. The experience doesn't seem to hold over as much. That's why you can have a player. I mean, think of some of the players you have now who only became famous last year, but they could outperform Froggen, who's played a million years, and if experience counted, should have such a mad edge, you'd never be able to catch up on him, you know. But League of Legends doesn't seem like that.
I just want to say one more thing before it comes back to Grabbz as a Korean lover, whatever, because the community likes to remember those things. Ultimately, give me the resources to have like a sister team, a B team for younger players. I will never in my life import a Korean player again. Okay. Because then I have the control group. I can see over 6 months, who is this guy? Does he actually want to be the best or not? Like Kelsey said, and I don't have to take the gamble anymore. So just to make sure here that I'm not saying by default Koreans are better. It's just we are not, like as I said before, Zirene, with the system itself breeds the players, basically. And we don't have systems in place here on the West that nurture those young players who can then become great.
Yeah.
So again,
it just comes down.
Like the academy teams now in NA, for example. Like, I think over long term, this will lead for that, I mean, of course, there will always be imports, but NA teams will import less because they have the time and resources to look for younger players. And that's important.
Okay. The series we were talking about was Misfits versus SK Telecom, right? Here's a question, Zirene, right? Coming into this, people had made some fairly compelling reasons that actually Misfits, just very specifically because of some of the problems SK Telecom had shown, like had a shot going into this one, like at least it was a good matchup, even though, you know, on paper, if you just say, you know, second seed EU team versus second seed whatever SK Telecom, it doesn't sound like that should ever be a reasonable matchup, right? Does that mean that even though, yes, Misfits absolutely might have won this series 3-1, they might have got into the semis, would it have been different if they'd had to play most of the other teams that were the first seed from their groups?
I think so. I think even like RNG is a team that would body them because they're so bot lane focused. And I don't think you'd get, even if you got that type of advantage, I don't think Hansama is good enough of a team fighter to out team fight. Even we saw Bang, right? Out team fight Uzi. I think that's another one. Even Prey, right? I think that they would have fallen short there. So I think Misfits actually went pretty far. And I think that it was it was a good performance from them, but I don't think that stylistically it would have held up because I think their team fighting is something that they haven't been together enough long enough as a team to really get that down. And I don't think their fundamentals in team fighting are solid enough compared to a team like SK Telecom, RNG, Longzhu, those types of teams.
I think it's really impressive that a team that has 0 players who have been to Worlds before managed to do as well as they did. So even if we're like really down on SK Telecom and how they played the series, or we acknowledge that the way Misfits played is based on limitations of the team, the fact that that happened is still really exciting and really impressive. So
yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that Misfits, there was only one thing that really stopped them from winning the series, and that was just not being as good of a team fighter, because we saw the weakness of SKT versus like EDG, where that's true. That's
sort
true.
of one thing as well.
That's true. That's true.
It usually does help Tal Faker.
It definitely, it's helped them in the past, and it'll probably help them moving forward. But yeah, I definitely think that SK Telecom showed a whole bunch of weaknesses versus teams like EDG, AHQ, where they are very exploitable in the early game. Misfits jumped on that, and then they just weren't able to close out the series via team fighting, and that was pretty much the only thing. Because right now, even if Misfits won, I would have said that the worst team moved on to the semifinals. Because I believe that SKT is a better team because they have more of the aspects of what makes a great team. They just didn't check some of the boxes, whereas Misfits, I feel like they're missing a little bit more. And in that series, there was just one that really could have put them over the edge, and they dropped the ball on the team fighting.
And I think
I just want to make sure. Sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that like something we can highlight at least in every series that wasn't Fnatic RNG. I feel like the team that won was the team that was able to make adaptation mid-series. And SK Telecom was definitely able to do that, and I didn't see the same thing from Misfits, so...
Yeah.
I just want to say very clearly, because we're very down on SKT, we should, because they played really bad, but Misfits played to their strengths, their compositions, and they deserve to win every single game. Like, that's also very important to make, because people will say, they got lucky, because SKT was bad that day. This was not the case. Misfits especially, coming in as budget G2, playing slow, to make the change to say, we go Blitzwing Leona, and we will play high-paced League of Legends for this game. Was very nice to see, and all respect to them. Like, as I said already, they deserve to go through if they would have won that game. Nobody could have said, SKT got unlucky.
After watching the whole tournament, who do you think was the best player on Misfits?
Ignar.
I want to say Ignar, but knowing that he will have difficulty like playing meta champions, it's really difficult for me to just like straight up give that to him.
I feel like it's still close, like him and I think PoE a little bit. But Maxlor is also somebody that really actually surprised me a whole bunch. But I don't think Alfari or Hansama were even close to being good.
Maxlor is an interesting one because I feel like what highlights Maxlor is just like his decision making in the spur of the moment. It's not necessarily like his mechanical prowess or his individual play mechanics or anything like this. So, but I really do think Maxlor should be in the conversation of one of the best players on Misfits. So, like you could say Ignar for maybe based on mechanical ability in that sense, and then maybe like Maxlor on a broader scale.
Maxlor is kind of like I think it's like a Mark Twain quote where the best swordsman in the world doesn't need to fear the second best swordsman. He needs to fear the man who's never held a sword before. Because if you're the best swordsman, you know what the second best swordsman is going to do. You know the techniques, you know the routes, you know all that stuff. Whereas this kid picks up a sword and starts swinging it around, you don't know exactly what he's going to do. And that's kind of how I see Maxlor. Maxlor has I don't think he's completely random, right? But I think Maxlor does things that go against convention, where you go, whoa, that's like a 30-70 in favor of me, and he still took it, but it worked because I'm not expecting it. So maybe that increases the probability that it does work out.
I mean, we can talk about this because the example everybody's saying is against TSM when he ganked to Jay's top lane level 3.
Okay.
Right.
We can say either, this was random, because if TSM has a ward there and they see he's not invading, he will get nothing and lose the game solo, basically. Or he knows from communication that people told him, Ryze didn't ward, they can't know if you're invading or not, and therefore he made the decision. And knowing Nubar, I think he actually took the decision from the information he got from Power of Evil.
Well, I also think that that's an isolated example, but let's look at this series really quickly. The Ivern contesting the Gragas for like 2 minutes at the red buff when the Jace top is there to push him out. The Ivern gets the buff eventually, right? But they got Power of Evil's flash for it off the invade, and that was something that should have gone in the favor of SKT, but he stayed around so long that Blank starts the camp. He comes back while he's doing the camp, and he gets like half his HP because of it. So Blank's not expecting that. And then in game 5, they're like, okay, let's invade again with topside with Jace, and Misfits try to hold it again, which by the textbook, you should not do. And then they place a ward down, it gets killed, and then they don't see the buff get stolen as they're contesting it.
But that's
I feel like that stuff you should not be doing if you're trying to go for a low risk, low variance game. And that's like, you're either going to win that really hard or you're going to lose that really hard. And I feel like Maxlor takes a lot of those situations when, Korean style might be lower the risk while having the
for example, the invade example in the fifth game, the mistake is not warding for it. That's the mistake.
They ward it, but it gets killed by SKT. They should have warded it earlier, right?
Yeah, no, they should see the invade coming. Like, they should even put defensive vision. Like, maybe they tried to invade topside with the Fresh. They should have done that from the Raptor camp. or up the ramp, get the vision in deeper in SKT's jungle, and then they know if Jace will come in and win. So by the time Jace at the buff, it's already too late, and you kind of have to contest it. Because that's of course it's a coin flip, but I think that's the best option you have at the moment. Like if you can go for the buff, if you get it, of course, you get it. If not. But the mistake is not preventing that play from SKT in the first place.
But I feel like what happens in that situation, right? You get the wards, you see the Jace come in. How are you going to stop the Jace and what was it, a Gragas or something? Oh, Jace and J4, and they have mid lane Taliyah. Because if you stay there with your Shen and you try to contest it, the Taliyah is going to have shove advantage on the Syndra, right?
Of course.
If you just
but
tiptoe around.
The thing is, what I mean is if they do it by minute 1, they have more time to react to it. That means if they see them coming, he can just start blue, and then SKT will not have vision on both side, and maybe he invades, maybe he does again the same thing against TSM. That's what I mean.
Oh, but I feel like he doesn't want to do
the...
Yeah, I feel like he just doesn't want to give the top side to Jace, right? I feel like he's contesting it, and I think he's being stubborn, and he doesn't want to go to the bottom side to do blue, because he could have done that on Ivern, and he could have done that in that game, but he went for the higher variance play of sticking around even. Like, even if you see it coming, right? I feel like it's way less worse to go to your blue buff and just be like, all right, you got it.
But they did it. That's what I'm saying. They saw them too late to react to that. If they would have went with Igna and Fresh and waited for Raptor Camp and get the vision down first, then they can make the decision because they see Jace earlier if he's contesting or not. And then you can make the decision based on that. But if you see them coming at 120, you will be behind. You will lose your red buff, you will lose your Raptor Camp, you will lose more.
I disagree. But
the thing is, we had this kind of wait since like 6 months already, and that's always a response. If you see it too late, you kind of contest because else you lose the whole control for the rest of the map, because then SKT effectively splits the map with a Jace. You don't want that to happen at all costs.
But if you see it coming, the result is you 3v3 and they have a range advantage with Jace. Like, what is the result if you see it happen? Like, what is your response if you see it coming? You go to your blue buff, and you're saying that you lose 20 seconds or the camp doesn't spawn until later. Like, the time to walk across the map to get to blue buff instead? Like, what?
It's also more like if you have vision done first, it's also easier to see where they put their vision. And if you count wards, for example, you can then plan out your next move if you're going to invade or you're going to go the free buff route, even if you have to. Like, if you give yourself more options if you have the vision first, basically. And that's what you have to do against Jace Taliyah. It's a losing thing anyways against Jace Taliyah. There's no way you can contest it. It doesn't matter what you have. Like, Jace Taliyah are the strongest level 1 champions in their respective roles. So SKT can always pull this off if they want to. And I agree with you. Maybe they should have seen it coming. But I'm just saying, like, then they have to prevent it earlier. To Fresh.
Prevent it or avoid it?
I mean, there was also options that we had in like scrims because we played against that. And then we just said, okay, we know for a fact they invade. That means we just get to support here. And we win the game by doing that. You know, there are that kind of options there as well. But of course, if Fresh is not there, he should concede the buff and not contest it against Jace Taliyah. There's no way to win that.
I think also some of the plays that we identify as risky, like even outside of these buff contests, which I don't really understand, like in the context of how I've seen Maxlor play this year and then last year as well. It is really weird because this isn't like the type of play that Maxlor will consistently take these high risk plays. In general, like I don't think of him as a jungler like that. But I think that because of the way that Misfits are going for this, they're going for like the bot lane. They're going for, we don't really care what happens as long in the rest of the map. We're just going to play top. We're going to give up, like I think it was the Ivern game. He was like level 4. And in bot lane versus like a level 6 Gragas at one point, and then they were just like legit 3 people bot the entire time and pushing like to tier 2 already by 8 minutes or something like this. It was really bizarre, like this tunnel focused vision on the bottom lane. And I think Misfits are making like these more risky decisions because of the way that they've set up and the way that they've decided they needed to play this series, which is to, I guess, get to a point where they are out snowballing the Ardent Sensor, I guess. Because even if you're playing Ardent Sensor on like your Karma or your Ivern, those champions are basically not going to be useful to you later on. They just become Ardent Sensor bots, so you still get outscaled.
Yeah. Even harder because they're lacking a mid laner, basically. You have Karma.
Right, let's move on now, because I actually thought one of the most fun series to watch was the Fnatic Royal Never Give Up one. Because first of all, Royal Never Give Up obviously looked very good coming out of the group stage. Fnatic only kind of got it together in the second week. But also, one storyline in this series is like, people often are, just because so many people who follow League of Legends are like mad weeaboos and just think like watching anime is a personality. It's not, it's just a type of TV show, right? Because so many people do that, they always try to like force the meme that someone's like an anime when they're not in any way. Like 99% of League of Legends storylines would be the shittest anime ever made. But this is one of the rare instances where actually it would be a fantastic anime. If you just watch the way sOAZ played in this series, because he's the character in an anime that has to get like his ass kicked, and then he like just turns something on inside him and he goes fucking ham. And it's like he has to get his ass kicked, he has to have all the criticism, everyone has to be laughing at him, and then just as he did in week 2 of the groups here, just as he did as this series went on, he just like powers up to an incredible level. You know, it's like he's that boss that you have to beat down to 30% health, and that's when he unlocks the extra 200 health and, you know, goes to the next level. Because after the first 2 games, he just went fucking ham. He was like the Western Faker in that equivalent, you know, he just didn't want to lose this series apparently. What did you think in this series of the top laners?
That's somewhat even accurate to the way I think it actually played out, because I did interview him afterwards, and he said that like he felt like he had to play something that could have more of an impact than what he had been playing, and Gnar seemed like the right pick. So this is the pick that he goes to, like when he's beaten down and when he's like, okay, it's time for sOAZ to carry, kind of mentally in his head. So I think that, I think that that's a fair thing to say. Also of note, though, is like how much Gnar can have an impact on the laning phase, and how I really do feel like in general this is not Let Me's meta at all. But so I would say that sOAZ was definitely the better top laner this series.
Because the weird thing about him is, I actually know this from talking to him over the years a lot, is he got this weird rep, right, that he's like a bad teammate, because people think, you know, he lacks motivation, or people think, for example, that, you know, he would play weird picks and he would do a lot of weird stuff. But what they don't know is, I actually think that part of the reason why he has some bad games is because he's actually too good a teammate. Like, whenever he plays shit champions that he doesn't want to play and he doesn't think can win the game, but his coaches and his team tell him, do this because, you know, this is what successful teams in the meta are doing, and, you know, let Reckless carry and let Caps do whatever he want mid lane. He's actually being a good teammate, but that's what he thinks a good teammate is. He thinks, right, so to be a good teammate, I have to do that. But you notice every time he sort of just breaks and just goes like, give me everything I want. That's actually when Fnatic's fucking fantastic. They actually look really good when he does that.
Yeah, when he plays more selfish, it looks better for them, because the way he gets out of those situations is almost comical, right? It's like, oh, he shouldn't have been able to do that, but it gets them so much, and he does it with such frequency that I don't know if it's chance anymore. Like, I feel like he is outplaying those situations slightly, but I actually like to talk about the 2 top laners here. I actually thought Let Me played really well. Like, his first game was incredibly good.
First game was good, yeah.
First game was incredibly good. The second game, what was that? That was he played against the Cho'Gath. Yeah. And I felt like that was a matchup that there was pressure top lane from Broxah early, and they didn't really respond correctly, because I think MLXG was feeding most of these games. And then in game 3, I think he was winning a matchup that he shouldn't have been winning against the Gnar early. And I thought Let Me actually had like a pretty good performance. And I think sOAZ's game 3 was really the one that, you know, he went Super Saiyan in, but at the same time, he put himself in these situations so much that his scoreline looks like trash when you look at it, right? Yeah. He has so many deaths because he felt like he had to do something and play really selfishly, and it put them a bit in a hole, but it eventually got them the win because they were able to wait. No, that was the game where they did a stupid Baron. They didn't do Baron. Yeah. No, this was the game where RNG legitimately have the game. This is the one where like Uzi feeds him. He feeds himself to a fucking turret, the Nexus turret. He dies. Then they end up going and resetting, and it's like this fiesta. And then they killed like 1 or 2 people by the Baron. And instead of going Baron, they go to stop Caps, single person pushing mid, and then they go to tier 2 top.
and they should have done Baron there, because then when they reset, Fnatic does Baron. And that game, like, I thought that game was like, you know, sOAZ is causing all this pressure, but I feel like he got way too many props for the performance, because I think RNG had the situation and they just made 2 wrong decisions, and sOAZ just delayed the game, helped stall the game when those decisions weren't made.
This was, again, like almost the Cloud9 factor, though, right? Is that you end up in a situation where your team is just like misplaying so much so horribly that you're reliant on these individual performances. And so you do give sOAZ props for that, but at the same time you say, okay, the entirety of Fnatic is like really screwing this up. So
yeah.
Well, the thing is, okay, we were referencing before, like Koreans and the best Koreans. Here's the difference. I can't think of any Korean team who could make it to a Worlds, who could get that many kills onto their superstar AD carry and not close the game. Like, in what universe are you ever coming back into a game where the guy has double-digit kills on a Kog'Maw, you know? And how are you getting back into that game? It's not.
I mean,
so what's bizarre is, remember, if RNG did that, they would have just 3-0'd the series. It would have been over.
Yeah. To be fair, in that game, if you just rewatch the fights, how Fnatic used the Karma shields to kite back whenever Kog'Maw is running at you with W. That won the game, basically. That Uzi had never a chance to actually stand and hit somebody, because every time he had W on, Fnatic made the point to kite back and wait for it to run out. So, like, in a sense, Fnatic played really well around the Kog'Maw in that game.
No, Uzi's an idiot. He built Randu and Zoman. He didn't build Frozen Mallet, and then when he built Frozen Mallet, he sold his boots. So he like can't reach them to slow them, to chase them. So I'm like, why did he build Randu and Zoman? But that was the thing where I was just like, I don't know what he's doing.
And also, how much engage do you really need to justify like locking down, like not being able to lock down target? It's like, oh, but the Karma kiting against the Galio, Jarvan, Morgana, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was just about how the team come back when the AD carry is fed, because the team plays around your AD carry.
Sure,
if the rest of your team can engage, then that's a different story. Because, of course, if you're Jarvan Galio, you should close out the game very, very early.
Yeah. sOAZ actually did a good job in the fights where he was like not with his team. He was like in a weird diagonal angle flanking and just slowing people with Frozen Mallet and like making sure that they always, like, I think sOAZ did this thing that you like to do, that you should be doing in chess, where it's like, don't go straight at it, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to take my knight, take your pawn, and then we just do this like trade. It's like, no, I want that pawn. So I'm going to threaten the things protecting the pawn to weaken its position, even though it's in a strong position initially. So he's threatening from a side that makes the tanks go, we can't combo because he's threatening us, and we have to actually, you know, make sure he can't get into our back line. Yeah. That our defenders of our big, you know, artillery are okay. And I thought that he was spreading them thin and allowing Fnatic to stay in that game for a pretty long time.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? If we're going to talk shit on Uzi, you have to talk him up for the rest of the series, right? He's a pretty good fucking player. I mean, you were saying earlier, okay? Oh, no, okay, Kelsey. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying this to be an arsehole, but I realised when we said episodes ago, you know, well, who does really pop off except Faker, right? We did put in the caveat except Faker. And Uzi and a few other players, you know, you can actually have mid laners and AD carries that carry the whole game. I realise CSM's not aware of that, but, you know. So come on, Kelsey.
Yeah. I mean, I think on that episode with Wicked, I disagreed, and Uzi was like an example. I do think that Uzi played really well. I think that underrated, though, is that how much RNG generally get off of having like a winning mid and being able to like use that as a sideline threat, so that all that they have to do is like they have control of sideline as the game progresses because of how far ahead Xiaohu gets. And then Uzi doesn't ever have to put himself in a situation like when he's clearing out mid where he's necessarily in danger, right? Because you have the threat in the sideline, he can soft reset the mid wave. He's very safe until you get to the team fight and you set up for, and then because you have pressure in the sideline, you can set up for Baron from that side, from that angle. He's very safe until you get to a team fight scenario. So like the way that RNG set up their mid to late game macro game is almost like single-handedly designed to protect and enable Uzi. But then once you get to the point where you're team fighting and you're doing this, like he steps up, right? Like he cashes in on what is promised, and that's like what you have to do as an AD carry in this situation.
Because I mean, obviously the narrative everyone gave for this one was like, oh, it's Uzi I versus Reckless. Like, yeah, it wasn't so much, though, was it? Like, this was not a good day in Reckless's life. Put it that way. He wants this one back.
To be honest, there was also, I think, more the difference between mid laners in the series because Caps had a shocker of a day, especially in game 3 and 4. I think Caps was
As in bad?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Like shockingly bad. Like, especially
What was the problem?
Like, I think Gaio just, he's not comfortable in champion, and I can kind of, I mean, it's not an excuse, but can happen. But the Malzahar game, especially, like his little decisions to split from the team on choke point and walk alone somewhere else, so go greedy path and just die over and over again. If you're a mid laner who's supposed to be a bit zoning for you, because running into Malzahar is extremely hard, especially with Wireless, right? Because his Void Links do a crap ton of damage. But if he's playing that badly, then I don't think that's about AD carries anymore. Doesn't matter the matchup.
I actually felt kind of bad for Broxa because him and sOAZ, like in the first game and then like later on, they would give stuff to Caps. And like Fnatic came out on Twitter and so did C9 and said like they were the primary scrim partners of each other. And I think that's how, you know, Fnatic learned to play around mid throughout this tournament was they were probably playing C9 who plays around mid in their scrims pretty much every day. And they gave resources over to Caps and then he wasn't able to perform and he wasn't using them. And we even saw Broxa like have fantastic ganks bottom. Like I actually think that if you took like the first 8 minutes of all the games, Reckless is beating Uzi in most of them because of Broxa's ganks. But Uzi still has pressure. So Uzi's like pushing the wave better, even though his support has no flash and died twice. Yeah. So I feel like, you know, they understood how to pressure bottom, but Uzi was just like, nope, we're just going to shove. We're just going to keep going in. I trust that my team will be behind me if something does happen. So I think Broxa did a good job of camping mid. Caps didn't convert. And then Broxa did a good job of camping bot, but he didn't camp it enough because they had things like Talia and they kept diving bottom, but then they stopped at like 10 minutes and they didn't keep doing it. And then they lose like first turret more often than not.
I think RNG, one of the weirdest narratives, like based on how they were going into this tournament in particular, was that RNG's like early game will just crush Fnatic or some of these other teams. It's just because I feel like RNG intentionally almost like lose side lanes just so that they can keep pushing the wave. Or like there were so many games where you're playing Soraka and Kog'Maw or something like this super vulnerable, like escapeless 2v2, and you're pushed all the way out, and you only have like these really basic shallow wards in the bush, like by the lane or something, and so you're pretty much guaranteed to get ganked at this point because your 2v2 isn't even like that strong. Though Soraka is like kind of a super underrated 2v2 champion, but isn't necessarily going to be as strong when you add in the factor of the jungler and like you have enough burst or something of that nature, and then you have, so they know and they accept that they're going to die, but they're playing for these late game team fights. So as long as they have pressure mid and as long as you can push the lanes, I think they don't care that much. What they want is like the tempo advantage so that they can then transition their bottom lane to the top side and get these turrets, and then you have an open map, and then you can set up these team fights and these picks. Like they love the pick comps, they love the 3 sweeping lenses, and that's the scenario they want. But they will lose side lanes for it, like for sure.
Yeah, and I know somebody who helps them lose side lanes is MLXG in almost all the games. MLXG was like inting every lane. MLXG actually looked pretty bad, except for game 3. Game 3 was the one where I watched him and I'm like, this guy is actually insane. There was in the first 8 minutes, there was a portion in the first 8 minutes where he spends 2 minutes and 30 seconds between clearing one camp and then his next camp, because he runs down mid, ganks Caps, runs the other side, ganks him again, runs through again, goes straight down bottom, and then he gets a gank on Reckless. So he blows like 3 summoner spells, but he spent like almost 3 minutes without farming at all just to keep ganking. But that was necessary because they actually drafted all 3 losing lanes. So MLXG was like, I got to do something. And then he let them win that bottom side of the map and the mid. And so that I thought was really cool that he was able to do that. But I'm like, if that's going to work only 25% of the time, I don't want it. I was like, they're winning in like, not like, you know, because of him. They're winning, you know, in spite of him, like despite what he's doing. So
I felt like definitely he was a big factor where I'm like, moving on, is that going to keep happening? Because he's going to be going up against blank.
I mean,
he's the opposite of blank.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, to highlight that, I want to talk about Game 2, because Game 2, I think, was the worst game of the whole tournament so far from both teams. Like, it was atrocious at all points. So we have, for some reason, they thought it's a good idea to pick Vayne into Tristana. And they knew Soraka as a thing. So the hard lost bot lane, extremely, like, it's not even comprehensible how that can happen. So, I think they got bot tower at 8 minutes even after the gank, right? But before that, of course, Fnatic has no vision bot side. And then they drafted Maokai into Cho. And for some reason, MLG thought, it's a good idea to gank for the Maokai while bot lane is pushing. He will snowball the game. So he ganks top lane. Yes, he gets a flash up. But then suddenly Uzi is an enemy turret. Is that he has no cover. And that's why Broxah gets his gank off, which like, Broxah, good job. But it's like, MLG makes a conscious decision to go top there, reveal himself, and basically sell his bot lane to get killed. And then after the tower, instead of going bot with the bot lane to push out again, to get tempo, no, he goes tops, he farms his Crux. Uzi cannot push out correctly, Fnatic has tempo. Like, in what world can the Fnatic bot lane have tempo? It's because he just goes top lane and wants to Crux or something. This guy is insane in the head. Like, he's really fucking good, and that's why it's so frustrating to see him sometimes be that stupid. And of course, Red Smite, Black Cleaver, Jarvan is another thing. we have to mention...
The funny thing, though, is despite all of the feeding he does in this game, he's the one who steals the Baron that would have put Fnatic in like the winning position, and Fnatic like weren't good enough to like close without having to do the Baron. MLXG gets through even though there's a Janna and a Vayne that can knock him out, and he still gets in. So like literally this series should have gone 4 games, but I think RNG should have lost the second game and Fnatic should have lost the third game.
Yeah.
I see it differently, because the second game should be over at 8 minutes when they get bot tower. If they play correctly, the game is over in 20 minutes, they get all towers, Vayne does nothing the whole game. That means RNG flew first. And then that highlights very well the problems of Fnatic, that they have no concept of side pressure. Because if you're 6k ahead and you have Cho'Gath into Maokai, there's no point, you have to go for 50-50 at that point in time. It was, I think, 22 minutes or something, and that was the first Nash. The second Nash, was it, right?
Yeah, it was the second one. It was the late one.
Their setup was legit. They had no deep wards. They push out mid, they recall, and rush Nash. That was the Nash setup at that moment. There was no deep vision, there was no sideline pressure, there was nothing. The first time sOAZ tries to go for a sideline push is at 44 minutes, and that's when RNG can just rush a Nash. And that's just so infuriating to watch, because this issue Fnatic has for a year now. Even back in ULCS, VS ROCCAT knew this is how they play, this is how we come back. And they did not address that, and it was so obvious in this game. Like, RNG gifted the game to them, and then if they just wait for the advantage they get through sideline pressure, which they should have in this matchup, they just win the game cleanly. But no, they go for 50-50 for no reason at all. They let MLXG get in, and the Baron gets down. Like, the second game from both teams was atrocious overall.
Okay, what was the game? Was it actually game 4 that I'm thinking of? The one where, I think this is actually the tweet that I made that you two responded to. Wasn't it about the fact that Fnatic did that really weird draft where like basically like Reckless was going to be the damage output, and then obviously he built like Guardian Angel as a third item, and then in general I just couldn't really understand what was like the win condition for Fnatic in this game, you know, with what they drafted and how they played it out.
Oh yeah, because they were winning that game early, and then because they got like 3 or 4 early kills, and then Caps like does the weirdest thing I've ever seen, where he like runs mid as Galio, gets chunked on the way there, decides it's a good idea to try and run all the way to bottom lane to pick up the honey fruit to heal himself, and like Xiaohu just goes, oh, flash and auto, and kills him, and he loses his own flash, so he loses so much pressure, and Xiaohu is the one who actually like stood out in the early parts of that game to me.
Okay.
I hated that from Caps. I thought Caps played really poorly.
So for the draft, to explain again, there's 2 instances you can play Galio, right? You can play it into a kind of protect AD carry comp, or you can play it in an acceleration comp. That means you want to snowball the game very early through early pressure you have. So Fnatic has the tools with Sejuani and Varus Taric to dive bot lane very effectively. And that way Galio, when most early matchups he has pressure, he can come in with them. And that way they get bot tower, they can push out, do the same thing top again 2 minutes later. And that way they want to snowball the game, get a huge advantage, and keep just being aggressive. Even better, they had Nara into Shen. which of course Shannon's kind of there to prevent it from happening. But if he's on a tower 24/7 because Gnar is pushing relentlessly, I think sOAZ got the first blood tower as well in that game. So Fnatic had both sides to play around. Even if bot lane something happens, then they fall back. They can still play around the same style around Gnar. So I think the draft from Fnatic, actually I liked it a lot, because if they are proactive and they show that they use Galio a lot, which they didn't, obviously, because Caps was not comfortable, the draft was good, I think, objectively.
Okay. And what about playing it out, buying third item Guardian's Angel on your AD carry?
Yeah, I mean,
someone theorycraft, like, legitimately, try and make the strongman argument. Make the best reason as to why Reckless would do that. What do you think the positive is if you can do that? How could he play it out?
Because you're a mono threat composition with a Galio mid, so your AD carry is pretty much your sole source of damage if Gnar is split pushing. So the only way you lose the game is if your Varus dies, and they have J4 and Shen, so they're going to get on Varus. So why not have GA to like make sure you don't die?
Yeah, and you're also playing like these super long team fights also because of the existence of the Soraka. So I think that's like, if your logic is, they're going to they effectively have GAs because they have a Soraka ultimate. Yes. So I guess.
I mean, I don't want to read too much into it. I'm not sure I do. But I think he kind of went back to his I do it myself style, because he used to build like Frozen Melon on every AD carry, in the sense of you can't peel for me anyways, I do it myself. Yeah. So now he's Galio and Taric. There's no reasonable thought that can say, okay, take GA. You have Taric, Ultimate, and Galio. Maybe he was again, okay, if you lose this game, we're out. I want to win this so hard, and even if I have to do it myself.
Okay. Wouldn't another team that had a comp like that picked, and in theory they're going to play around the AD carry, wouldn't they have just gone into an Infinity Edge and you just try and kill them in these team fights before they kill you?
Yeah, and that's why I didn't like Uzi's Randuin's Omen either. I feel like I said this earlier, where like as an AD carry, your defensive tools are not your own. Your team covers your ass with their defenses. That's why we even have supports like this, right? So the Galio giving him damage reduction, and the Taric giving him heals, giving him peel, giving him an ultimate. Like, he should trust him, and his job is to deal damage at that point.
But also, to be honest, of course it looks bad to build GA, but Fnatic should have been way further ahead at this point in the game with the comp they had. So in the end, it wouldn't have mattered if they went for another item, but of course it looks weird if he goes GA.
Yeah, I think the big part was they were sieging bottom, and then they backed up, and then they went back in after they got a kill. They backed up, and then they went back in, and then the Corki package with Shen. Yeah, that's what really got them. Is Xiao who actually like won them this game from like the killing of Caps to getting the package in and being that aggressive.
And it's exactly what you say, because I think it's fully on Caps, even though I don't want to blame players, because first of all, he's kind of like running back and forth in the river, not sure if you want to stick around bot or not. Then he has to call the package. Maybe, of course, you hit yourself, right? There's a sound. And he should know, but that by that time, Corki could have Trinity Force, because that's a big difference maker there. That Xiao had Trinity Force in base, then the package, and TP and Shannon. That all together made it kind of possible for Fnatic to fight there. And even if Caps was full life and he sticks around the tower, then he won't TP there. He can't. Because he just gets taunted, he gets knocked up, he dies. So Caps walking away again gave Xiao the option to connect with his play, and this kind of won him the game already. Because by that time, with the Galio comp, you have to have the bot tower down already.
Yeah, I also didn't like Caps' build in the game, because he went for Abyssal Mask over buying Adaptive Helm, which would have worked against Corki and Shen. And then he also went for, what was the second item? He went for Locket, I believe. Yeah, he went for Locket. And I feel like against that composition, like the Taric's going to get a Locket. I would say get Righteous Glory. So you can Righteous Glory towards the Twitch almost every fight, or you can Righteous Glory in. It's second item on Galio pretty commonly. I do see Locket, and I don't think it's bad completely. But at that point, I feel like that's less of an aggressive move, and that's more of a Uzi's going to open up with Twitch. I got to hit Locket to respond to it, as opposed to I need to lock him up and like get in on that. Those were like the two. I didn't really like his build, and he seemed pretty uncomfortable.
I think the mask is fine just to compensate a bit for lack of magic damage. Even though it's only 10%, it's something, you know. And if he has it's a bit more aggressive for his team, because they only have Gnar and Varus actually who effectively can do damage. But for the rest, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, no, I think the mask is fine too.
To transition into talking about the All-Korean quarterfinal, which we don't have to spend too much time, as a 3-0. One factor I wanted to ask you about, and this is a more relevant series, is another trend I noticed was, okay, so we had this meta that was obviously very, very set of the Ardent meta throughout the whole group stage, and people generally, aside from Ignar, were just doing this all the time. But bizarrely, in the quarterfinals, there were a lot of Tarek picks, and I have to say they lost a lot of the games. What is the logic of why Tarek suddenly became a focal point at this stage of the tournament?
I think, for one thing, Tarek was kind of an answer to some of these really hard pushing lanes because he has sustain, he has like the threat in the two. He's like actually kind of oppressive in the 2v2, so I can see that. Also, if you're playing like super hard engage comps, like people will pick the Tark to kind of deny the duration of like Jarvan ultimate or something like this, or lessen the impact of that. So I think that that's part of why Tark rose up in priority. Also, it's one of the few champions with like a stun or an engage that can also be build Ardent Sensor, right? So there are a lot of reasons for Tark to be a good pick right now.
Yeah, right. He can give Ardent Sensor to his entire team as they do Baron, so they don't lose any HP. He's and once Lulu is banned away, I actually think he has good lane matchups versus most Ardent Sensors. I think Janna isn't that oppressive to him. He can heal, and you actually kind of win that lane in trades, and you just basically just heal your AD carry up. Even with Soraka, Rakan, he actually beats Rakan. So he's kind of like one of those premier ones. But the thing is like people were like blind picking Rakan pretty early on in the tournament. Like we're talking like play-ins and stuff. And then I'm pretty sure in scrims, people were like, oh, I'm gonna play Taric into it, or I'm gonna play Thresh or something, right? And that may have happened like behind the scenes, and that developed. So people are like picking Taric early on once Ardent Sensor support's banned away to kind of block them from going for Rakan, because it's a little bit riskier to do so. So Rakan engages, and like Taric can get the ulti off in that time and protect his team. So I think Taric is like a fantastic team fighting pick, and nobody's playing like lane bully supports right now.
So one thing I actually sort of loved about this series between Longju and Samsung is Longju had already fit that mold that everyone loves to force what they think is the best Korean team into, which goes like this. They have the best AD carry in the world. And you know what? Their mid laner is the best in the world. And you know what as well? Turns out their top laner is the best in the world as well. So they had the best in the world at all three positions. In theory, Samsung had none at any of these positions, but Samsung 3-0'd the series. So how do we even get into this? How does Samsung 3-0 a team with all the best players? Admittedly, no one said Cos was the best jungler. I will give you credit.
Yeah, I was like,
even on that one, admittedly. But if your three laners are supposed to be the best in the world, what the fuck went so drastically wrong?
I mean, I had a rant about this on the mega episode we had where it was like, yeah, Longju is a team that consistently drafts like winning lane matchups on almost every player. So they're going to look like the better player if you're judging players based on like how well they're laning, because they're always going to have these consistently strong lane matchups. I also said that like the way to target Longju is not to go for top, which so many LCK teams tried to do during the LCK season, but to target the bottom lane, because if the bottom lane doesn't get ahead, the bottom lane can't stay and clear out mid and hold mid and get vision and pressure mid while Khan is split pushing, and then Khan has no pressure that he can generate off of, even if Khan gets ridiculously ahead. So like Samsung just kind of played this out, and they didn't necessarily play it to counter Longju. They played it because it's good in the meta to play around bot, and this is something that they admittedly said that they identified when RNG beat them and came out first in the group, is that they're not playing enough or playing well enough around bot, and the compositions in the first game, Longju also has an issue with maintaining vision and pressure mid, so they pick the Malzahar, which made no sense to anyone. Contrast this Malzahar with Caps' Malzahar. This Malzahar had a really poor early game as well and didn't really get off the ground, but the way that they played it well is that they had it set up for catching Longju and face checks, right? Effectively, and getting pressure from there. Of course, Khan shouldn't have TP'd off of that, because then Cuvee just has free pressure for the rest of the game, and then it's really, really easy for Samsung to close off of that. The adaptation Samsung makes after that first game to make it even more punishing is to put globals in multiple lanes, so that bot lane can't even get pressure. Bot lane has a good matchup, and they played out really well against Longju, and they identified and sort of made it very clear why Longju is not good in this particular meta and why they can't play this out. So, it it was a fun series from that perspective and enjoyable to watch from that perspective because I thought like a lot of the things that Samsung did were really smart. But yeah, these are kind of the holes in Longzhu.
There was actually a comment that Veteran said on the last episode in reference to Gam, when Gam played that game against Longzhu, which actually seemed pretty fitting for this series, which is he said that before, because Longzhu had done so well in all these games, people made out like, they came into Worlds without any weaknesses. But in that Gam game was where they had like no vision, and they basically had no clue how to play off that. They just like sort of turtled in their base, and just one ridiculous team fight is what stopped Gam from winning the game. So in this series, you kind of saw, right, that when the vision was taken away from them, I mean, they had no answers, it seemed like.
I mean, part of it was also they just like had no way to get vision if they don't have control from their bottom lane and mid. Like part of the effectiveness of Longzhu is like if you can constantly push out mid, and this is why Varus is another really great Longzhu pick, is that Varus like not only has good matchups, but he clears out mid really well. But if you're not like, if you don't get your bot lane ahead and bot lane can't like free control waves and like force people away from engaging on them, you can't like send Gorilla to get vision in jungle, or send Gorilla to get vision in around Baron, send Cuz and Gorilla to get vision around Baron without getting picked off by the Malzahar. So if you don't have that ahead, then yeah, your vision's going to suffer. And since Longzhu almost consistently have winning bot or consistently have winning side lanes, they've never really had to deal with like, how do we get vision from behind in these scenarios? And that's where I think their vision fell down.
Yeah, I think game one is definitely like that. I spent a lot of time on this series because I was trying to figure out whose fault it was. Because Longzhu, they looked like pretty good coming into it. Like the beginning of the game seemed really good. Like BDD shit on Crown in the laning phase. Like forces him to back, TPs, forces him to back again, almost solo kills him. But the first part that really messes up for them is when he gets killed by Ambition over the wall when he goes too aggressive. That makes them lose mid lane priority, which then ended up being that mid lane turret actually stayed up until like 30 minutes. So because he lost that pressure, they couldn't get mid, which meant they never had a way to push mid to tier 2 and then go for Baron and reclaim the vision. Because what happens later is Longzhu really fucked this up. They get the bottom tier 1 and then they don't swap. Why the fuck didn't they swap? They needed to swap their bottom lane to top, and that would have opened up the map for them, but they didn't do that. So they have the turrets are like 1-to-1 until like 22 minutes because they don't swap it out. And then they lose pressure, the Tristana scales, and they end up in a situation where Khan teleports twice inappropriately, and now he can't split push and have his team reclaim vision of Baron, and Samsung have a vision like engaged team. They have Rakan, Sejuani, Malzahar, Kennen. You can't even come close to face checking that. So Khan actually kind of fucks his team over, but BDD is kind of the one who. So it's like everybody's fault. It's like BDD's fault for being too aggressive, so they never get mid. Then it's Prey and Gorilla's fault for not swapping, and then it's Khan's fault for TPing twice and having it not be worth anything. So really, Longzhu dropped the ball across the board, and then it's I got to blame Cuz for something. So
you missed the one mistake.
He face checked. There you go.
That's right.
You missed There's one still big mistake that when they wanted to fight a Drake and they saw QVTPing and they knew he was there and they still went for the chase where he flashes in them, they could have easily went for mid tower. And then this issue later on what you mentioned with the Jax under the team not being able to push out and get vision, that doesn't happen as well. So even though we mentioned vision and Samsung playing well, Longzhu made very many fundamental mistakes. We're not used to seeing all of them.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, whose fault is it? Because when I watch Longzhu, I'm like, it's got to be somebody's fault. It's really like everybody's fault across the board for Longzhu. Like they really did in game one shit the bed because they were winning with two winning lanes, a more aggressive jungler, and then they had like this scaling top laner that they never swapped out, and then tried to once they used the pressure bot, transition the pressure because that's what you do with your winning bot lane if you have one is swap it over, get your tempo.
That's what's so bad thing the bot lane play. So they have tempo for the tower, which is great. They get Drake of it, and you're like, oh cool, they get two things out of one tempo play. And then they go for the gank, you're like, guys, get the recall. Yeah. You have the items ready. Like just go back bot, push out, and swap top. And the game is over.
When teams take bottom tier 1 and then they don't swap, it's because Dragon is still up. They got Dragon. I was like, you could swap top, get Rift Herald for mid,
and you could get top turret. Like Longzhu had a way to win this game, and I'm sure they're kicking themselves over it because that was a very simple play to make.
I mean, they've made like very simple mistakes throughout the tournament. I think, like for example, in the game series, like the initial dive on Galio was really like in the hybrid lane was like super awkward. I don't know. I just think that they've misidentified. They kind of freaked out because I did a couple of interviews with BDD throughout the tournament. Like they were kind of freaking out because what they were doing wasn't working necessarily in the current meta. And I don't think like they specifically wanted to avoid Korean teams in quarterfinals. I think maybe to give them more time to figure out like some of their issues. And they kind of imploded a little bit, I think. And maybe it's because they have so many young players. And I feel like Longzhu is a team that plays with strong lanes, not because they're just like so good that they can defy the meta, but again, because they're almost forced into this situation because you see how many times Cuz gets caught when like Samsung have bot priority and they have the Sejuani Shen set up and they're able to like catch him in his own jungle several times. So, I mean, like when you have strong lanes, you minimize some of the problems with these types of invades and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. It also does help that if you look at Samsung, like first of all, Ambition, pretty experienced jungler at this point in time, and QV, wasn't having the best tournament coming into Worlds, but obviously everyone knows he's a pretty good top laner. So to some degree, isn't that what you kind of need against Longzhu? Because I mean, you think of Longzhu's one big moment, obviously he's beating SK Telecom, which was when Huni and Antara were just broken men, shit in the bed all over the place, and then the jungle situation is already, as we've discussed before, a problem at times for SK Telecom. So, if anything, they were primed to look their best in that LCK final. Whereas in this matchup, it's hard to predict it coming in, but Samsung had the tools, right?
Oh yeah, I think Ambition is the best jungler in the tournament. I think he's fantastic. Even coming into it, I thought he was the best jungler in the tournament. And I have no idea why they ever run Haru, to be completely frank. Like, meta doesn't suit him. Samsung don't look like the
They're
same
just trying
team.
to copy the best coach in League of Legends. So what you do is you start with the bad jungler, and then you bring the other guy in, you know? It's what all the cool guys are doing nowadays, right?
Yeah, I mean, it proved itself. I mean, he did it with the mid laners too, right? With Easy Hoon back in the day. Why would Easy Hoon never play, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, this was a game or a match that I thought Samsung really showed what being together for a year looks like compared to Longzhu, because there were times where Khan looked like he wasn't selfish enough because he didn't want to like almost in a way kind of like offend his team for being like, no, screw you guys, I'm gonna get this turret. And then you saw QV do the exact same thing where Crown is like going in, QV's like, I'm not gonna come guys, I'm gonna get this turret because that's gonna help us in the long run. And it felt like Longzhu were trying too much to, like, it's almost like a facade of being a team, right? It's like, oh, we're all best buds, we're all a team, we're all going to be able to, you know, band together, I got your back. Whereas Samsung is like, no, you don't have to have my back, dude, I know you're going to be good. And they trust each other a little bit more. And you saw a lot of that where like Ambition gets shoved into the jungle early, but they still all play back, they understand where he's at. So I feel like Samsung just have a way better understanding of what to do relative to what happens to the rest of the team.
Aren't they the best team in the tournament at this point from playing from behind?
Yeah, I would actually say so. I think Ambition doesn't hesitate on engages, and he's one of the only junglers in the quarterfinals that I thought made consistent, intelligent engages in the moment that they had to be made. He never hesitated, because a lot of the quarterfinal junglers on Sejuani and Jarvan would hesitate for the engage, and the moment would be lost. And I don't think he ever did that throughout the series.
I would almost say that Samsung is the best Korean team in terms of fundamentals as well. Because what you mentioned with, especially game one, if you look the interplay between the 4-man and QV, you could almost put away the minimap and only look at QV, and by the way he moves, you can see how the others are playing. Because every time is the smallest window, those 4 immediately step up more than the 1 second before. And just this knowledge and understanding of when we can actually force something and when we're ready to fight is something, of course, that we expect of top teams. But I think Samsung is a team that consistently does it the most. So also going into the tournament, I thought that because they have no flashy players, right? They have QV, of course, who's insanely good, but they're not a team you would say, they're going to outplay mechanically and they're going to smash their opponents. But they're just so smart about the game and they understand those small things so well. That's what makes them great, and that's why I really like to watch them. But even so, again, in this series, Longzhu lost it and not Samsung won it. Like, Longzhu did many mistakes going over all the 3 games, But of course, a team like Samsung, with an understanding of the game, how it should be played, of course, punished that very, very effectively.
I think,
I think the Shen pick really showed that Longzhu don't know what Samsung's going to do as a team, or that they're going to respond that well.
Yeah.
I think, the thing about Samsung is that almost the same storyline and trajectory happened last year, where they come into the tournament, they're in like a rough group, people are like, maybe this could be a team that doesn't come out first in their group, and they came out first last year, obviously, but this team like has some issues, and you saw in the first week last year also, like they lose the game to TSM. They're obviously like, through interviews with the team, you could say, okay, we didn't necessarily have the best grasp of the meta, but then as they progress, like you see this team sort of transform, and they're playing like last year. It was an issue of when we're setting up, when do we split versus when do we group, which they adapt like very well game to game last year. And that was like, for me, the defining thing about Samsung. This year, it's like, oh, we need to play around bot. And the way they play around bot is really, really effective as well, because they aren't doing like the brute force multiple bottom lane ganks, like snowball really hard, just like get this turret. They're forcing the enemy bot lane off of the turret by invading and controlling the jungle. And so you get slow chip damage on the turret and eventually get first turret, and then you transition it this way. And it's just like a really, really intelligent way of using pressure. But the issue is that I feel like Samsung may not get it right when they first come to the tournament, but over the period of time, they really figure out like a good way to do it, a smart way to do it that works for them. And so I think that this team is like definitely continues to be a threat as the tournament progresses.
Yeah, I think last year they suffered because Core JJ was new to the team. They were subbing out Core JJ and Wraith, so it was like, how do we kind of coordinate with bottom lane? And then the meta really suited Cuvée in the top lane, and he learned that over time. That it's like, oh, this is a really good meta for him. And the guy was still a beast in LCK, like this split, right? Like he was definitely one of the best, if not the best, top laner. Him versus Khan was always like a really good matchup where it's like blind pick Jace, oh, I'll pick Gnar. And then this time they picked the Kennen into it. So I really liked seeing that from Cuvée, because it was him saying, I know exactly how to handle the Jace. I'm going to pick like a favorable lane matchup, and then I'm going to force him to team fight. And it made Khan really uncomfortable because it looked like he didn't know when to abandon his team, like I said before. But Cuvée really forced that onto them with the fact that he was going to play for the team. So I think that in terms of top laners, Cuvée, he's definitely looking really good right now. But Samsung as a whole, like you were saying, Kelsey, like they're coming into their own near the second part of the tournament here, and that's exactly when it needs to happen.
So let's transition this then to the semi-finals then. So Samsung's obviously going to play WE. Like, obviously they've had very different routes through the tournament. What do you actually make of this as in a best of 5? Like, does WE have a chance, put it that way?
I don't think so. I think they can take a game, but especially given Samsung yet wasn't forced to adapt between the series, so we don't know if they can do that effectively. But if they can, I don't see how WE should win more than one game if there's no early game hard.
They did adapt, actually. I would say that, because like in the first game,
it's different adapting after a loss than after a win. Right?
Yeah, sure. Fair enough.
That's what I mean.
But I would say that like they identified something that made their strategy better in subsequent games. Like in the first game, okay, bot lane has pressure. How do we mitigate that? Like, how do we set up for this to be well? We can implement global things like that. So they did demonstrate adaptation.
Yeah, of course.
I think that WE also demonstrated adaptation, and WE also, like, for a Chinese team, have a pretty decent grasp of fundamentals. And in terms of like top laner coordinating with the rest of the team, like you can say similar things about how 957 plays. I don't think 957 is anywhere near as good as Cuvée, but like his position in conjunction with the rest of the team, like some of the really weird side trades that Cloud9 tried to play in the series, where they would just like try to jungle top, get the turret, and then they wouldn't rotate their bottom lane, and then WE would just hard push, and like they were trading sides without rotating their bottom lane. It was a very bizarre, but it was like WE really outclassed them in those scenarios. So I do think that like WE can play like the fundamentals fairly well. They can adapt within series, but I just think that Samsung will do most things just like way better. There may be some kind of opening in the mid lane setup, just because I think Crown has actually been really bad this tournament in general. And even if Shia hasn't been good either, I think Shia has been having like weird overperforming moments at least. The way that mid lane is working for Samsung right now is that like if Crown loses pressure, Ambition shows up, helps him push out the wave and get like a better back timing and stuff like this. So yeah, I just think Samsung is a better team overall. They have better answers, but like WE aren't just like garbage, I guess.
Yeah. I don't think they're garbage by any means. I just want to see like maybe a Kog'Maw ban comes through and they can like force Mystic to adapt a little bit. I know they're like banning Xayah against him as well, but I want to see maybe that come through. And then for Samsung, I feel like if Crown actually shows up, because I think his games 2 and 3 were good. I think his 2 was a little overrated because like people are like, oh, is Taliyah like really screwed over BDD? I'm like, BDD was kind of winning, and then like the fact he had Taliyah really helped him a whole bunch with, you know, sectioning off objectives. And when your team is winning, Taliyah is going to look fantastic because she can always join and she can help you section off objectives and take them. So I think Crown, if he like shows up like his game 2 and game 3, then I think it's going to be a really strong top half of the map for Samsung that I don't think WE would be able to deal with. And if you have one lane or 2 lanes of pressure, transitioning that into the next one is so simple to do in League of Legends that even Longzhu couldn't fuck it up. So I feel like you would just take that down bottom and you would be able to like push Mystic and Ben and kind of get yourself an advantage there and really kind of shut down the win condition for WE, because I have not seen them be a very diverse team stylistically. That's my worry. Sure. Is like people said it's the Mystic show. I didn't fully believe it because I'm like, people say this team is all about this person, but it's not always like that. But it really is the Mystic show, and it's super surprising that it is.
One huge one. Okay.
I was just going to say, and the way that Samsung play around bot is like non-confrontational, and it doesn't really create openings for like weird outplay moments either. Like the way that they force the bot lane off of the turret is really effective against WE, I think.
And also, one huge thing I should mention is how the Lissandra pick changes dynamic in mid lane now. Because beforehand you had Galio and Taliyah only, who can kind of influence the bot lane. And before that, you only had answers which can contain Taliyah. Like, they could not implement the same pressure that Taliyah could. Now Lissandra kind of has the same style, but not only does she contain, apparently, Taliyah, but she can do the same thing Taliyah can. I thought before the game, Taliyah should still win the matchup, but apparently after like one back or something, Lissandra can just auto-shove the wave, and there's nothing Taliyah can do. So right now it's on Team WE to either find the same answer, which can implement the same style as Taliyah, or they have to possibly ban out Galio and Taliyah on blue side to just put pressure away from this Lissandra pick. Because if you leave Taliyah open, either they get it or they counter it, and both is not good for you, obviously, right? So this is something of the biggest question mark Team WE has to answer for this matchup. If they don't find an answer to that, that will really, really bite them in that series.
Yeah, the Lissandra could be crazy because, like, I don't think WE, I don't know how well they'll handle flanks. And I think that what happened with Samsung was they showed they can play 1-3-1 and collapse and use Cuve's knowledge of flanking. Like, we used to talk about Smeb as being like a fantastic flanker with TP, right? Same with like Someday would get in there sometimes. Cuve has been up there forever as one of those guys who could actually flank, use Echo, W effectively, can use Kennen. And I want to see what happens when WE is pulled thin by both Crown and Cuve crashing at the same time, because they got that down to a science.
And is this a game where we just won't see like late game team fights?
I think we will. I don't think Samsung pressure enough early to really get it going. Like, Ambition is a lot of countering and waiting for like Sejuani to scale or like get himself to a sweet spot with the ulti. So there is a chance for WE to kind of get in there early.
So then it is kind of all on Mystic then? He has to kind of be the superstar in this series?
I guess maybe Condi could like step up and really do something early to throw them off, but I feel like Ambition just recovers too well, and the rest of the team respects what Ambition can't cover. So if he's like, Jarvan's in my top side jungle, then you know Cuve is going to back off, even if he has like a really good matchup for himself. So. I don't know, maybe GA, because like we were talking about it, Kelsey.
Yeah, I think that one thing that WE do really well is like they're able to like juggle the aggro and team fights in terms of frontline. Like they get you whittled down to the low health, and then they're able to like transition who the enemy team is targeting sometimes in terms of like their use of range and the way that they're coordinating these team fights. Because WE, like Samsung, is a team that's been together for a while. Like they swapped out Ben and Zero, but as a general like 4-man unit, otherwise they coordinate team fights really, really well. This is a scenario that I think would be interesting to see, would be the Samsung WE if the teams are even, like late game team fight. I just think that Samsung will just have more advantages on the map, so the team fights won't necessarily be super even late game team fights. So
yeah, like you said about like they're really good at doing coordinated kind of aggro swaps. That's why I think like Samsung beats them, because Samsung are just a really good flanking team, right? The 1-3-1 collapse, and I know they can like have like the front line kind of tag each other in, but I feel like when Mystic's under threat, the whole thing just goes out the window, and it's like, Mystic, you better perform, you better peel for him, everybody back up, and it's just like red alert because the one guy who pretty much is the heart and soul of WE is under threat.
Okay. So the other series is obviously the really fun one to talk about, because in theory, you're supposed to say, this is the storyline every Worlds, like, oh, even the best Chinese team probably would lose to whoever the good Korean teams are. Now, I think actually last year they were a bit hard done by. Like, those are some pretty good series. I thought the ROCCAT EDG one wasn't terrible. The RNG SKT one was actually pretty good, but it's just SK Telecom in there. Right, this time around, Kelsey, RNG could win this series, right? RNG versus SK Telecom?
like, I kind of want to say yes, but there were just so many issues with RNG in the quarterfinal, and I think
issues with SK Telecom, though, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there were a lot of individual issues with SKT as well,
okay,
like in terms of individual play. But I do think in general, like ultimately the way that they adapted, it just became like they were able to shut Misfits out. Like even though people say that last game came down to an Elder Drake or whatever, I do think that the fact that SKT were still able to keep up side lane pressure throughout, the fact that they had good Baron control, good Baron vision in general, except for obviously when Misfits got the Baron, I think, if I remember that game correctly. So I think like just they kept the sideways push, which is something that SKT are very good at doing. Even when they lose mid control, they're able to find pressure somewhere on the map. So whereas I don't necessarily see the same thing from RNG, they're doubling down on UZI. They haven't really adapted how they're playing in general throughout the course of the tournament. Like they changed in order to get to the tournament, but they will give up like so many advantages in side lanes, and I think that's where you attack SKT kind of. Is early on you use like mid jungle pressure to attack the side lanes, and then you can snowball from there. So I just don't see RNG being the team that like does what Misfits do and like get control of SKT early and try to muscle them out. And then I think later as the game progresses, they lose control of side lanes. They don't necessarily confront like Huni properly or get Huni picked off or identify situations like where SKT are lacking mid pressure. So I don't know. I think it could be a situation where RNG beat SKT. Like, before I did a VOD review for this, I was thinking, well, I actually kind of feel like the W Samsung series will be closer. But after I did the VOD review, I now have identified like more mistakes that SKT make just in terms of like when Bang is pushing out topside and the rest of the team is mid, or when Huni is pushing out like bottom and the rest of the team is mid. So I do think now that RNG SKT will be closer. But I just like SKT's ability to identify what is going wrong in a series and then adjust how they're playing for it is just super good. And RNG haven't really changed much at all throughout this tournament.
Okay. But I mean, here's one thing RNG has going for them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you probably actually have to say, not just because of results, but Faker and Uzi might actually be the two best Worlds performers we've ever had. Like, even last year when they didn't make, obviously, the final, they went out in the round of 8, he always turns up, he always plays well, always somehow doesn't play as like it feels like he's one of the only examples I've ever seen of a player where like the excuse Western players will give where they won't practice properly because they're like, nah, but I can beat this guy anyway, right? When they say that, I'm like, no, actually it's because even if you tried now, you can't focus, like what happens is this is you on an off day, The difference is Uzi does seem to play worse sometimes, like domestically against lower level opposition, but in the Worlds games, he does somehow always come and it plays legit, plays top tier. So is there no world in which that's enough to make this an upset?
I think it scares me and excites me at the same time. A lot will hinge on MLXG. Because I agree completely with Kelsey that RNG itself will not change the style to early game focused skirmishes on both sides.
Sure.
But this guy is so crazy, again, in both senses of the word, that he will find a way to catch SKT off guard. And I don't have confidence in SKT after the Misfit series that they effectively will take the steps to prevent them from bleeding out. That means if he finds early advantages, especially on both sides where Bang and Wolf are showing, I think, their weakest performance internationally for a long time, there is a chance where RNG can win 1 or 2 games, and I even said a third one.
Well, here's one for a start. Remember,
I think this series will go for 5 games, by the way.
Remember, game 1 will be Peanut playing, so all we need is MLXG to fuck up, be in the right spot at the wrong time for Peanut, and then to get a gank off on Huni, who's playing a carry champ, and there we go, right? There's the first 10-minute script to start game 1, give RNG game 1, then the games fucking begin, because then we have the Korean adaptation, we have Blank come in. That's when game 2 is when the real series starts. You have to give them a 1-0 advantage to be sporting,
See, the jungle matchup is where RNG straight up lose, because if you remember, the only 2 series really best of 5s I think last year that SKT played where they started Bangi and swapped in Blank were against RNG.
All the way around, but yeah.
No. The only 2 series where they started Bangi and swapped in Blank were against RNG. And Blank
think they'll do it this time, then?
Blank and MLXG actually know each other really well.
Right.
Blank, it always seemed like in those series, Blank had MLXG's number, even when this wasn't Blank's year of playing. So they used to be on the same org. They used to play each other. Blank knows MLXG's style. When you talk to him, he's like, yeah, the red smite thing, whatever. All this other shit. It's just, I don't know. So obviously maybe there is a mental advantage that Blank has there where he's just in this guy's head. And if anyone can understand MLXG and synthesize him down to some basic function, maybe it's Blank. And maybe super storyline mind game. This is how SKT overcome RNG again.
If you were going to tell me that Peanut's going to play game 1 and Blank's going to download MLXG, I was going to call bullshit because I don't think you can download MLXG because I don't even think he's up for upload. That guy doesn't even know what he's doing half the time from what I see, but he makes it work. It's Blank is the light, MLXG is the dark. They are complete polar opposites from each other, and it could win RNG some games because it's just so batshit crazy sometimes. But I feel like Blank's control has way less variance to it. It's more likely to work out and more often than not, and I feel like SKT can play around that. Now, SKT looked like shit in their quarterfinals because their bottom lane was feeding most of the time off of matchups that, now they're used to maybe neutral matchups. I don't know what the excuse is, but I don't think that's going to happen versus RNG because RNG actually had their bottom lane getting 4-man dove and losing, and then they would come back, and it would be off of team fights. So this is probably going to come down to team fights or if MLXG can really get somebody ahead because you were talking, Kelsey, about mid lane pressure and transitioning that. I think the first flaw here is that it's against Faker, and I feel like Faker is going to be able to hold up against Xiaohu. So the things that have been working for RNG to get them to this point, I feel like are soft countered by SKT, hard countered in the jungle, but soft countered and harder to do. So they're going to have to pull out some new things, or they're going to have to draft things that really go to the extremes of what they want to do.
If Westor and Mountain can beat SKT is mid jungle in a 2v2. I mean, come on.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I okay.
At least a couple games,
Random aside, Grabbz, the AHQ SKT draft was that shit. Both those comps lose. Whoever gets Baron, the other one loses. There's no wave clear in either of them with a Cassidon.
Yeah, that was an interesting game for sure. Yeah.
Oh, it's so bad. Even the winning team has a bad draft.
So you're saying though, Zirene, it's going to come down to team fights. So SK Telecom's a better team fighting team than RNG?
I actually think so. I think they have more ways in. I think sOAZ is a better team fighter than almost everybody except for Faker on SKT. And if he's given resources, it looks really damn good for them. But I think that SKT are just better team fighters across the board, except for maybe Huni. That's about it.
I think the biggest chance for Anji to win this game is by being on red side, either initiating the handshake or like letting him happen or preventing it. Like either both get either Jenna Lulu or both are out. And then ban from mid lane and counter top lane. Like, don't let Huni have a good matchup. Kind of try to not let Faker run loose. Because, again, I don't have confidence in Huni to read the game effectively on a tank or on a bad matchup to put pressure on. And then get to the point where we can team fight. Because, as I said before already, both of you, I think sOAZ outshines Bang in that regard. And then it's going to be between Faker and sOAZ like team fights who can do more. And of course, in the Adam Sensor meta, sOAZ should have an advantage in that regard. So again, contain Huni, give him a bad matchup, and don't fall into the trap of, let's say, giving them Lulu for free or giving them Janna for free. Because then, of course, with another peel you don't have, Bang can do a lot more.
So do a mock pick ban with me really quickly on red side, right? Because you're gonna ban like Kalista, right?
Yeah.
Are you gonna ban? What's your next ban?
Kalista. I would not ban a guy on red side, by the way, because I think Guy was a better blue side ban. So you wanna let's get you to ban that. I
agree.
You can go for. I mean, that's the kind of X ban, right? There's nothing that stands out for me because you have to think about Xayah later if Rakan is still open. Because if Lulu and Janna are banned, you leave Rakan Xayah open. It's kind of bad for you. You're forced to picking Rakan, right? So that's something you can do. You can ban Xayah.
Are you going to ban Tristana?
Not in the first game. Yeah. Because if you ban Tristana the first game, you force yourself to ban it on the next red side games as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and you probably get it if you're leaving like one of Lulu or Janna up because they're probably going to take it unless they really think it's like that high priority. But the thing I have here is, are you going to ban Jace? Because if I'm SKT, I'm blind picking Jace.
Yeah, I don't. Jace, You're right. I forgot about Jace.
Because you can't. Yeah, red side, you can't ban Kalista, Lulu, Janna, and Jace, right? Like, I'm either going to get Janna or Lulu, or I'm going to get Jace. And I think Huni with Jace is just, they can blind pick it, they get control of top lane, and it really kind of props Huni up. Even though he builds tier, and I think... Okay, so
what's gonna happen?
I hate the tier Jace on everybody except for Huni, because Huni's going to feed, so he needs to scale in some way. If you give him like a serrated Dirk build, he needs to pressure and not die and like play like Khan plays Jace. But if he builds tier, it's okay if he dies 3 times. He's gonna scale. So I hate the build normally, but I like it on him.
You play it out. It means on that side you ban Kalista, Jace. They will ban maybe X, Gaia for sure. It doesn't really matter what they pick, right? Because now we're in a situation where we have Xayah and Rakan open, where if they have to pick Xayah, because if they go Rakan, Yoke Xayah.
What if I ban Galio, Xayah, and Lulu? I can first pick Janna, and then we trade Sejuani Jarvan.
That's fine for you. Completely fine. Tristana's also open, remember that?
Yes.
So if you go Janna, they get
That's
Tristana.
True.
And the champion they prefer, in that case, Jarvan, most likely.
Yeah.
Because Jarvan's couldn't do anything else besides Tristana. So yeah, a lot of hinges. Like SKT, of course, on blue side always has the control, right? That's how it goes. You control the draft completely. And red side has direct to you. So it's more about how confident is SKT in giving away a Janna Lulu or Tristana and play around that fact. Caitlyn is also a champion we still have to consider. That means first picking Tristana is not so good for SKT if Kate is in the game.
First pick Tristana is not so good. I mean, just like the freedom that Tristana has in general, and like how much you can get off of the bot matchup. I still think Tristana is just insanely like idiot proof. Even if you have,
that's a great way to put it. Her and Galio.
Even if you have Kate, like also the
bad. It just she has less value basically because she has to run into Kate in early game and she's vulnerable, right? Of course, she's still a good pick. But if you give up, then let's say you ban Lulu, go for Tristana, they get Kate and Janna, then good luck on bot lane, basically. That's what I mean.
Sure. I mean, I think also how much pressure RNG get out of mid. It's like the only lane that they have that's consistently winning is a bit underrated. And like how much they use that and to transition later on in the game and to keep UZI safe for team fights
Okay, so Kelsey,
is really, really important. So, like, the question is, if you guys are just like writing off mid and saying that like Faker wins that auto, like, I think that really shuts down RNG.
Okay, but this is the question though.
So I think you have to prioritize like maybe mid jungle matchup more in the pick ban then.
Wait, RNG does that is yes. RNG needs to prioritize.
I think both teams will. I think both teams really think about this as mid jungle control based.
Because that's the thing, okay? The logic, there's always two approaches, right? People either, and this is what people do a lot of the time, is they try to think, right, we have to shot fake it down, we have to gank him all the time, we have to give like our laner something good that goes against him, right? Obviously, everyone does that anyway, and it doesn't work that often because Faker's teams win so much. But at the same time, in theory, isn't RNG one of the only teams who actually has a mid jungle that can maybe do that?
I mean, this is also like why Jarvan is insanely high priority for them. So my question is like, I actually feel like Xiaohu has maybe been the second best performing mid at the tournament. I don't know. Maybe you agree, disagree.
No, I agree. I actually think he plays around bottom really, really well. I think the meta suits like the way that they want to play. I think like if we were going to say there's a Chinese style of League of Legends right now for RNG and WE, it's bottom lane. And I think the meta really came in for them at the right time where Ardent Sensor playing around bottom, having a neutral bottom lane, having a shoving mid is quite good for them. And like you said, I don't think like I'm not writing off Faker versus Xiaohu as like Faker favored the entire time because I said it before, like 2v2's bottom don't really matter. Mid lane, it's who has shove, and I think that comes down to draft, not so much like
meant by that
execution.
I didn't take Xiao as no chance. I'm just saying that in the draft, you want to prioritize the matchup for top lane more than for mid lane. That means you protect Xiao with 2 bans, get Talia, maybe blind pick or something. That means you have the shove advantage early game anyways, and Faker will outscare you maybe on the Corki or an Orianna or something, which is something that happens, but that way you have early push in mid, and you will have a better matchup top lane as well. I'm not saying that just player-wise.
I also think the jungle matchup is like more relevant for how mid will play out anyway. Yeah, so like prioritizing the Jarvan, I guess, in the draft earlier. Like Jarvan, if you're banning Jace, I think you can prioritize Jarvan pretty easily.
That would mean it would be good for SKT to first ban Jarvan then, because that's
why doesn't SKT just first pick Jarvan and make Huni play it? There's the next level, Paul.
Because
he can theoretically flex Jarvan, but
he has ass matchups top lane. He has really bad matchups. If you go now Renekton, you can't play the champion anymore in those matchups. So you kind of have to hide the flex, but you really can't because RNG has the option to just wait for top lane pick until end. So they kind of have to second phase ban Renekton and Gnar maybe, because those are really bad for him.
Yes.
I mean, there are many more other that are really bad for him.
Okay.
But that would leave you open because that means RNG can ban for another position uncontested in the technical ban phase. So you would give up so much in the draft just to get Jarvan top lane, and even then, there might be a bad matchup for him.
Generally, doesn't that Let Me guy just play all the dog champions? Or doesn't he just like permanently get put on Maokai, fucking Shen? Like that's just his life, isn't it?
You probably have to ban Shogath. Like to be honest,
I would say
you probably have to.
I would say like he's more of a carry top player. But because of how RNG have like gravitated towards playing, like I would say Spring, this was a solo lane focused team, like 100% in Spring. Summer, it was still really heavily solo lane focused until UZI came onto the roster, and then even then transitioning to playing around bot was actually slow. Like I watched the dive, and then people were setting this up as like a bottom lane focused team. Like some of the comps that they were setting up that people were identifying on this like protect the UZI comps were actually like Corki based comps, right? Like where Xiaohu would play Corki and like they'd enable him in this sense. So I do think that actually playing around bot is relatively uncomfortable for them to an extent. That's part of why like they lose side lanes control so often. Because they will give up some objectives and some control just to get kills onto Xiaohu so that he can have like good 1-3-1 setup or good like side lane push setup later on in the game, and then you can get the objectives and the vision in that sense. in that part of the game, because like they think that if they have that much power on their mid laner, then they can get much more map control out of it later. So I don't know. For me, like, yes, this team plays as a bot focused team in the sense that they go out of their way to protect UZI, but I think early game they always make sure they have a winning mid jungle. Like almost always they have to win mid jungle in a sense. Like you don't consistently see them playing to mid, but you see them picking for this setup.
One thing I remembered that you can also do with your RNG, if you get the job in early, we should not forget that he plays Rumble as well. And if you ban JS before, Rumble is kind of the default top laner with pressure early game, right? That means you can actually ban Gnar second phase, and because JS is banned the first phase already, pick the Rumble blind, and then kind of pick from mid lane. So you kind of get both worlds at the same time if you're on red side.
Well, I'm picking Rumble blind.
Rumble blind.
On top, yeah. You ban JS first phase, and you ban Gnar second phase. If you want the pressure, I mean, and you get the early pressure from Rumble, you can play around the early pressure, that's what I mean. And you can have the better mid matchup afterwards, that's what I want. Like, I don't like Rumble myself. Like, I'm just saying this is something they can do if they want to even maybe have a Lucian mid or something and then go that way. This is still something that I think Lucian is still a good champion, but it's so hard to play out in the draft.
So I noticed that because of all the players we've discussed so far, there's one player that doesn't exist apparently, which is the support player of RNG. And the thing is, because of that, he's had like the easiest ride the entire tournament. All group stage long, he was just getting Janna all day long. He got to the quarterfinals, he just had Soraka every game. Like, this guy's never been pressured almost, you know, even though in theory it's this bot lane meta. So does that change in this series? Does SK Telecom care?
He got ganked a whole bunch. He died like 2 times, 3 times early as Soraka. And that's when I was so impressed that Uzi was still like, I don't care if you don't have flash, stay behind me and heal me. And they just kept pushing up the lane and they still won bottom lane, even though they got ganked 2-3 times. So like Uzi, I feel like kind of pulls Ming around like, hey, follow me. And Ming kind of, like you said, has a pretty easy job, I would say. I don't feel like he's like been particularly challenged. I think during the group stages, though, he did actually play pretty well. I just don't think in quarters I really was like, oh yeah, Ming is making a big difference here. Then again, Soraka is always kind of difficult to tell, like the pressure that she's putting on the enemy team to find her and kill her. But I think like Uzi is always the big main threat here, and Ming has a pretty easy job.
With how it is at the moment, can someone like that always just get one of these, you know, a Lulu, a Janna, a Soraka if they really want to? Is there any way to just like force him to do some weird pick? Does anyone care to do that, do you think?
I think he has enough in the tank to just play like he played Morgana, he could play Soraka, Janna, Lulu. I don't think it's really worth too much getting him off of anything except like you literally just go, what is Uzi the most annoying alongside, and you get rid of that. Because I think Ming is probably just like, what do you need, Uzi? I'll just play all these different supports and just trying to be as helpful as possible.
If you're SKT, do you ban Soraka? Because if you don't, that gives RNG the option to last ban Lulu and kind of initiate, like, can you play Soraka yourself or not?
Oh, you mean like because Janna is not a good matchup?
Exactly. Either get Janna for free and ban Soraka yourselves, or
any scenario which makes Wolf have to be the hero of the game, I'm in favour of. Let's draw these up. Let's get on the drawing board. Let's get these motherfuckers going.
Wolf has saved so many games with like Braum and
that was a different time.
Picks.
A long time ago in a galaxy far away.
That was the same series where he was feeding every Lulu game every 5 seconds on Lulu, right? So like you have to be a bit selective there, you know?
Give him a tank. It's harder to kill. It's harder to hit on a tank.
I think Ming has publicly said, you know, like, I do everything for UZI, but he's also like technically the team captain and the shot caller. So he pulls his weight in his own way, you know.
Okay, so it was his decision to make Uzi do all that weird shit in Game 3 of the last series. Right, he takes the blame for that. Right? Idiot, what's he doing? He doesn't know how to use the resources in his team. Right, so is no one actually going to be bold and say RNG will actually win? You've all hedged it with like, they could, and if they did this, maybe, but is everyone going to take SK Telecom to win the series?
I'm going to take SK Telecom, yeah. I think it'll be a close one, but like I can't know what SKT's bottom lane looks like on that day. And RNG's bottom lane doesn't apply enough pressure early game from what I saw to really exploit SKT's bottom lane. And I think it's going to come to team fighting when
the whole team becomes a factor. And then you have MLXG, who's that coin flip in the jungle. And I feel like if you are a betting man, you bet on SKT because there's a higher probability that they win. And that's what I'll do it off of, right? I don't.
Right. Yes.
I think RNG could win, but I think there's a slightly higher probability SKT do.
Okay. I mean, I actually like the info that Kelsey had there, that actually that's one of the few times that they will start out with blank, because that's an interesting little wrinkle in contrast to the other one where you would think your first game is the one that RNG wins and then they have a chance, Okay, Grabbz, what do you think then?
It's so hard. If you would have asked me the question before the RNG Fnatic series, I would have said, oh god, yes. Like, SKT was so weak, they can't do it, but then they kind of crushed my hopes with their own mistakes. So, like, both teams are sloppy. I can't see a 5-game series for sure. So I would say it's 50-50. I can't, I don't know, it's boring to say it, but both teams were so bad in the quarterfinals. I think they both have a lot to work on.
Okay, let me put it this way then,
it's more likely that SKT will win, though.
Right, what about if both teams turned up and they got 100%, they were at max form? Obviously you can't be anything better than you've ever seen, but they were both at max form and they went head-to-head. Who would win that match?
How are we defining max form?
I just said the best that each of them have played.
I think because
at the tournament?
Whenever.
I think RNG.
I think Prime Faker still wins the game, by the way.
No, I mean with this lineup, though.
No.
Yes, you're true. You get that Faker be very good. But I mean like this version of SK Telecom, whatever they've looked like when they were at their best, and then this version of RNG when they were at their best in a game, if they both were like that for all 5 games, or 3.
No, I think RNG wins that.
Yeah, I mean,
in this meta, RNG wins.
Yeah,
the best RNG is able to get control of mid enough that they can just completely deny vision, in River, and then force SKT to walk forward, and then they collapse on SKT, and this type of stuff that they were doing in group stage, I think would actually be really effective against SKT, and the fact that SKT want to play far forward and want to keep constantly pushing out. So I think, I would say prime RNG. But again, you also have to factor in things like, I think RNG are perhaps one kind of team, whereas SKT have at times more dimensions. Well, they still have better adjustment that they demonstrated. So yeah,
would have had better adjustment with Untara as a sub. Just come on, swapping them out would have been.
You're blowing your load too early on the Siren. You got to wait until they do lose to RNG. That's when you just go.
That's what
ham as fuck on Cobra. What are you doing? You just cost yourself a world championship, you idiot.
Oh my god, just flame him. But yeah,
his legacy just ruined.
Oh, he didn't already ruin esports history with Easy Hoon. He's got to ruin it again.
I don't even care what he says about it. I know he's mad about that as well, but that's Iron's bad, mate. You literally
Holy shit.
You literally didn't let the best player of all time play in a final. Sick. You're a great coach. Brilliant.
I mean,
that's the thing. Go ahead.
The great thing about this series is that both teams are sloppy enough that this could actually be Faker versus UZI, right? Yeah. This could actually be come down to just Faker versus UZI, and then in the meta where everyone's talking about wave control and team play and everything like this, SKT versus RNG is just decided by hard carry performance.
Just put Faker onto Rise, put UZI onto fucking, I guess Tristana probably in this meta, and then just have them both get fed till the end of the game, and then let's just see what happens. And everyone else just spam tank, shield, and run in the middle of the two of them while they're hitting everyone.
Welcome to the meta. It's great.
Minutes, let them fight the Nash pit.
That would be straight fire,
Yeah. But a big thing to consider here as well, RNG have already beaten Samsung, and Samsung stylistically are kind of close to SKT except for mid lane, the way the Crown was playing in the group stage, right? So RNG have actually already shown, I would say, a better form than SKT throughout the tournament. I actually think RNG have looked better every single game if you compared their average to SKT's average right now. Because SKT against EDG were down a whole bunch, getting slammed early, and then they won team fights. And then they did the same thing later on versus Misfits. They got slammed early, they won team fights. RNG could slam them early with MLXG, and then the team fighting of RNG is better than Misfits, a little bit better than EDG, where they could play towards the bottom side with this meta. So I would feel like what we've seen from these teams, RNG, if you just go off of track record of this tournament, are actually favored, in my opinion, whereas SKT haven't shown us what we think would actually beat RNG. We just think that they're good enough with their history.
If you like hype and you like storylines, just imagine this. If RNG does win, they'll go into the final almost certainly against Samsung. They'll have be 2-0 up on Samsung. They'll have just beaten SK Telecom. They'll have beaten 2 different Korean teams. They'll actually be a favourite to win the tournament. And by the way, if they win this tournament, like, Korea just melts down. This is the off season where like everyone's getting fired. Like people are getting fired. They're bringing back fucking people from overseas who have any skills. This will be the true reverse of the Exodus. They'll bring all the people home.
I think China would kick out all the imports. They still got some in there. They would kick all of them out.
Well, it's great too because like Firefox is like the head coach. His entire it's like I knew when I came to Royal that it was going to be an all Chinese roster, and then I was really motivated and everything in that nature. So like they will actually go ham on that. But the one issue I have with like theoretically, yeah, RNG can smash SKT early, but have they been a smash early team at this tournament? I don't really feel like they have. Even when they like, I feel like their 2v2 is just won every matchup, and then they've lost the lane anyway because they're super overextended. So I don't know.
Also, what you meant, like MLXG is the deciding factor. If you can protect the bot lane adequately and can push the advantage, and of course, SKT is in a whole bunch of trouble. But if he goes ganking from Maokai again at 10 minutes,
or
then
you know.
Of course,
RNG spot doesn't have any ward coverage at all other than like one river ward that doesn't do anything for them if they're already that far overextended.
See, that's the secret. You overextend to bait them in so you can see them. You know, that's what you do is you play at their turret and then you get
know where the juggler is, guys. Good.
Yeah. Pretty good.
It's like it's like the Forgiven school, yeah? Just OP the gank.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I actually think Faker subscribes to that school a whole bunch where he plays up even when he doesn't have vision.
He's the founder of the school.
Because I remember I was watching some team scrim back at Worlds last year, and teams were constantly talking about how you pressure first and then vision second. So you pressure to get vision. You don't do it the other way around because then you vision and then you're pressured in and then you eventually have to push back out. So the first step is always risky. And Faker is just like, I'm going to push super hard. So there's times where he's gankable, right? Like he's not fucking immortal and like super safe. There's times he's very gankable. And I think we saw that happen in a few series where he was like playing Cassiopeia a while back and he was just getting constantly chain ganked. Like MSI, I think it happened. And it hasn't happened just yet for them because people have been focusing on other lanes as opposed to mid, which has been kind of shoved.
Because afterwards in Europe, I talked to many mid laners and they just told me all unisono, he just sees the matchups differently. Faker plays every matchup differently than what they knew from before. That means he gets pressure when he shouldn't. And this ability to just understand the game in a different plane than other mid laners gives him such a huge advantage, especially in those situations, right? Like, how often do we see him dominating a matchup where he should get pushed in?
Well, that's also the thing, isn't it? Because logically, if you haven't played Faker, you're thinking, right, well, he obviously just has a ward there. That's why he's playing like this. And he doesn't. That's the joke on you. The ward's over the other side of the map for the top laner or something, Like, that's always been that's why Faker is so ridiculous, because he actually doesn't need the pressure, but he plays as if he has the pressure, and yet at the same time, it's just a vacuum for all of your pressure. So it's like, I wonder why everyone else in every other role is the best in the world when they play with Faker. It's pretty nice playing at SK Telecom, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that I think you can play the style where you're just like pushed out super far, but you have to have like multiple lanes that are doing that to an extent because you need to be able to get something off of like the fact that that you're basically trading sides at that point, right? Like you need to be able to have pressure in another lane to get something off of the bottom lane getting cut, which hasn't necessarily been the case for RNG, right? So,
but if you're mid lane, and I think they do this quite well, if you have mid lane pressure, that can go to either side, right?
Sure.
I think the first game of SKT series, the one that they smashed Misfits in, is a prime example of that. Like Faker's playing Galio into Ryze. He clears like the first 3 waves. He's level 3. He backs. Ryze backs for tier. Faker TP's mid, clears that wave, and he roams top and ganks and gets Huni first blood really early on in the game at level 3 off of a TP and a back timer that he knew the Ryze was going to go for too. And so he just uses pressure to go to whichever side they feel like they're playing. So like Faker essentially becomes like this mid laner that still understands how to use the jungle and how to use pressure. And that's why I think like him with Blank is better than him with Peanut because they team up so frequently. And they both understand when they should be going through the jungle and why. And that's the thing. That's probably the biggest thing about Faker is not only is he just a mechanical god across all metas, he never looks like he doesn't know what to do next. He always seems to know what he's going to do next, whether it's the press of a button for his combo to chain them together, or if he's going to flash this combo, if he's not going to flash that one, and where he needs to be on the map. He's just always thinking. He's got that heads up mentality, that heads up play. And I don't think he never does this big, like, fatal mistake where people never think, if I was my opponent, what would I do? Faker is always like, yes. I would do this. How do I checkmate myself here? Because the guy's not a monkey. It's another human being. And Faker always has that respect where he plays it so well. And he's constantly thinking, if that were me, how would I play this? And then when he outplays, it's because I know that even if I was that guy, he can say, oh, he's dead 8 seconds before it happens, because he's like, I would be dead here because I know that there's no way out of this next play.
Oh, and by the way, I forgot the other aspect to the storyline. Here's the other thing that happens, but it's off camera, okay? Because all the storyline I described is what happens in the next round, what happens to the Korean scene. What you don't know that doesn't happen, because there'll be no camera on this, is when SK Telecom loses to RNG, every person who was a member of Rock's Tigers in the past destroys their hotel room, their bedroom, the team house, sets it on fire. Like, just literally, at that point in time, who knows? Because their life means nothing at this point in time, you know. Denied for all those years, but they're like, oh, it's SK Telecom though. Also, we were on the other side of the bracket to them. We would have been in the final against RNG. Like, you just destroy everything. You start over with your whole life. You wipe the whole slate clean, and you just start your new life then. And you don't even play League of Legends. You're just like one of those guys, like a wandering monk, you know, like, what's your past? I don't want to talk about that now. I'm a new man now. Like, you just can never remember that you were a League of Legends player because you waited too long. You waited too long for your chance.
You think the Rock's Tigers members are bad? Imagine being Pawn, Deft, and Mata in this scenario. Where
here's what's funny, okay? When I was saying before that, like, everyone thinks, like, you know, there's a plan against Faker. Like, that was probably the ultimate narrative that I'm glad died a terrible death, was the idea that, nah, we know the secret to Faker though, just have Pawn. No, actually, I think what you mean is have players on both Samsung Blue and Samsung White who at every other position outmatch every other one of Faker's teammates, and then it doesn't actually matter who you have mid lane. That's the real secret. That's actually how you do beat Faker. What? Because he can't actually 1v9 a game. Yes, you're right. A human can't 1v9 a game against other really good Korean teams. Not sure how you can follow that recipe. It's pretty hard to follow, isn't it? It's like if I made a recipe like step 1, add the most expensive wine and caviar, and like, oh, you know, it's like everyone's out already, aren't they? No one can afford the fucking ingredients list. Like, it's over already.
You know who would definitely be destroying their stuff if SKT lose? Is Smeb. Because he'd get such a fat check to join SKT after that. Yeah. All of his other shit's obsolete now.
Here's the thing I don't get about Smeb, right? Meb, listen, mate. I know you watch this show. Go for it. Have you not been watching and observing the scene, right? Here's the thing. I agree, Smeb. Really, all that matters in life is what you think about yourself and the conclusions you come to and the things that you learn, right? That's all great. But the problem is, in society, actually, what matters is just what other people think. That's how society operates. So you know how everyone to this day still calls Marion like one of the best top laners of all time because he played with Faker. They call Piglet from back in the day. He was an amazing AD carry. You know, everyone else, you get the credit, right? It's not actually, you're wrong. You are right in my world where it's all about skill and talent, right? You're correct. You are the most honourable player of all time because you could have gone and joined Faker, probably just won LCK and won Worlds and done it all, right? But instead, you're such a boss. You were like, I think I can actually beat Faker's team. I'm going to go against him. I'm going to try and beat him with a bunch of other people who haven't beaten him. And then we're going to hopefully win Worlds and LCK. And it's going to, you know, that'll be the ultimate comeback for my whole career. Joke's on you, mate. If you'd just gone and actually joined him and won, all these idiots would have given you the credit anyway. They would have just been raving about how good you are and about how Faker just played just how he normally does. Joke's on you. But seriously, though, you are a boss. But also, terrible life, and this is what happens. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Like, it's a brilliant concept, isn't it? I'm going to go against the best player of all time and his team and beat them. But it's like, yeah, but a lot of people thought that. You know, like,
yeah, but if you're the one to do it, like SKT have to fall sometime.
Like, here's the thing,
right?
Like, basically,
right?
When we go into, a lot of people also banked on that as well, Zirene. Like, when you go into Faker's lair, and obviously he's like a big dragon in this example. When you go into his lair, you know, All you are, Smeb, unfortunately, is the shiniest bit of armor with the skeleton inside it, you know. It looks awesome. You had a mega sword and a great helmet, but you also did die like all those other people around that layer, you know, which just contains all the fucking world's trophies and all the medals and MVPs.
Hey, it's Crumbs. You're lost? How do you not know where you are? It's Thorin's channel.